Hello? Is this thing on? Chat. How's it going, guys? It feels like it has been a while, but we're back, and I'm glad to be back. I missed you guys. It does indeed look like it's happening. Indeed, Giant Monkey Bud. I am glad to see everyone here today. So today we're going to be talking about the news that's come out regarding, I'll just make myself big. I'm big now. We're going to be talking about the news regarding Final Fantasy IX's 25th anniversary. Subtext, my guy, what's up? So there has been a little bit of, it does look like it's happening. I don't know what else to say. There's just been some really positive updates, some new merch that's dropping, some new anniversary logo. They say that there's new projects and stuff on the way. It does look like it's building up to something. Some people are convinced that something is happening tomorrow. I don't know. I can't tell you. Before we continue, I just want to make sure that my mic is not cutting out or doing anything weird, right? It does that sometimes. I just want to make sure that the mic is performing in the way that it's supposed to, and it's not doing any of the bullshit that it has been in the past, that it does sometime, specifically with OBS and Streamlabs. I don't know why. I've been waiting for you to talk about this, hoping for some news on Final Fantasy IX Remake. Yeah, I know. Right now it's good? Okay. Usually if it starts good, then it will not get bad. But if it starts bad, then it we have to fix it because it won't just get better. Typically. But yeah, it's hard to say. Anyway, I'm glad to be back. I'm sorry that we hadn't streamed much this month, but I'm hoping to fix that in April because we're going to be finishing up our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Hard Mode playthrough. Not today, obviously, but next week we'll start finishing that up, because we left off right at Rufus, and some of you guys were saying that I cowered it out because we stopped at Rufus. I will let you know right now, chat, that I'm a man. I don't cower out. Not against Rufus. Not against Rufus. Roto Capsule, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. I hope they explain why they skipped 8 and went straight to 9. I can explain this really easily. The team that would work on Final Fantasy VIII Remake is working on Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's about as as straightforward as it gets. That's why there's no FF8 remake yet anyway. The people who worked on FF8 are mostly the same people who worked on Final Fantasy VII. And so if anyone's going to remake 8, it's them, but they're remaking Final Fantasy VII. So it's a very simple explanation on why 8 was skipped. And it's not anything against 8. I know some people are saying, oh, it's because people hate 8. I mean, there are some people that hate 9 even, but it has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with sales even necessarily, because at the very least, because we will be talking about FF9's sales today, which actually are surprising considering that FF9 was kind of a bit of a softer launch than, say, 7 or 8, that it's actually kind of caught up, not quite to not to 7, where 7 currently is, but I actually don't know if 9 is the lowest selling 3DFF anymore in the wake of the information that we got today, and we'll be discussing that. I actually don't know what the lowest selling 3D Final Fantasy is. It might be 12 now. depending, because I don't know what the Zodiac Age sold. But that again, the Zodiac Age might have sold like a lot, and so it might actually be ahead. So who knows? Does anyone know who the illustrator for the 9 artwork is? Does it say on the tweet? We'll look at the tweet. I actually don't know who the illustrator was, because you have that, and then you have the vinyl cover. Actually, the vinyl cover and the other artwork is the same. Don't forget Vince Starr is pushing hard for FF8 Love, as it's his favorite. Yeah. It is his favorite. And honestly, I actually don't think FF8 is that bad, if I'm honest. Is it the weakest of like the PS1 trilogy? Yeah, it is. But like that's still like the weakest of like three of like the greatest Final Fantasy games of all time. Like three of like the greatest stretch of like from like the greatest era of like the entire series. So, I mean, that's still pretty fucking good, relatively. It doesn't have some bullshit to it. Yes. Okay, listen. Okay, I don't know. By the way, I'm actually wearing like my FF8 Uniqlo shirt. Here, let me see. So you can see, I verified do not hate FF8. I'm like literally wearing an FF8 shirt right now. I like FF8. Verified, not an FF8 hater. I wouldn't be wearing this otherwise. I recently started a replay of FF8 and it was hitting a lot better as an adult. A lot of the dynamics went over my head as a kid. Yeah. Like, I'm not gonna like tell you that FF8 doesn't have some bullshit to it. Like, it definitely does. But it's like, yeah. Wait, we actually got some news? I thought we were coping on nothing. We're not coping on nothing. Oh, Bear Boy knows the artist here. Hold on. 25th anniversary launches with new music. Wait, where does it say the artist name? Oh, it's you have the artist name here. I'm sorry. Uh Toshiyuki Itahana. Okay. Nice. Okay. I think we're going to start going over the information in a second. You guys poured in here. Holy fuck, the excitement is real. Okay. There's a lot of people watching. That's crazy. Um that's awesome. Can you still buy those shirts? I don't think you can. It's been a while since you've been live. I know. It's been like almost a month. I only went live like twice like this whole month. We're fixing that next month. I just had like a lot of shit going on, and I have a ton of shit going on. A user rightly claimed the name of Final Fantasy IX Remake. Oh, fuck. Okay. Thank you. We're adding that to the video agenda. Okay. Definitely adding that to what we're going to be talking about today. I appreciate that, Cloud Strife. Don't want to sound like a copium-matic, but FF8 never got a 25th anniversary push. FF9 gotten that push, but we know the remake exists. Is it finally time? Um, that is also important to mention, and we'll bring that up too. So, yeah. Giant Monkey Butt. The figures, I think, are the new updated designs of Zidane and Dagger. I think possible designs from anime/remake. I think so too. And if you look at the actual thing, it looks like a 3D model. Like it dead ass looks like a 3D model, like that they just 3D printed from the game directly. So I agree 100% Giant Monkey Butt. Oh, let's go ahead and take a look at why is the camera here reversed the other way? I like my camera inverted. I know it's weird. I just feel more like it feels more natural to me like that. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Should be this one. Unless. Okay. There we go. So, as you guys know, we have been waiting for Final Fantasy IX Remake for quite some time. FF9 Remake was first teased in the Nvidia leak, or I guess I shouldn't say teased. It leaked out through the Nvidia leak. And the Nvidia leak happened like years ago now. So, sorry, hold on. There we go. It's been 4 years basically since we've known about Final Fantasy IX Remake. And in that 4 years, we have been wondering what is going on? When is this game coming out? Is there ever going to be anything announced on it? Because almost all the games in that Nvidia leak have been announced, but not Final Fantasy IX Remake. So we've all been kind of patiently waiting, assuming that every single event, this is going to be the event, right? This is going to be the time that we finally see Final Fantasy IX Remake. And time again, it has not happened yet. However, just last night, something happened. Square Enix posted this, that they are celebrating the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy IX, and that's huge because we got this special logo here of Zidane, Garnet, and Vivi. And what you guys may recall is that right before Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was announced, we also got a 25th anniversary logo. And as I believe it was Ice and Fire in the chat just pointed out, or Icefire, sorry. Icefire just pointed out in the chat, we did not get a 25th anniversary logo for Final Fantasy VIII. Why? Because there's no Final Fantasy VIII remake in development. I'm so sorry, guys. It does not seem to be happening. I know a lot of people love FF8. You know, as I mentioned, I'm wearing my FF8 shirt now. I love FF8. Nothing against FF8. The primary reason that 8 is not getting a remake right now is because Creative Studio 1, the team that is working on Final Fantasy VII Remake, is currently working on Final Fantasy VII Remake. They're working on part 3 of that trilogy. And so, you know, Nojima, Nomura, Kitase, those guys are the core staff of Final Fantasy VIII. And they are all busy working on Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. So maybe after Part 3 finishes, these guys will get to work on Final Fantasy VIII Remake. That being said, they've also said that Final Fantasy X-3 is one of the things that they really wanted to work on. So even still, there may not be an FF8 remake, unfortunately. But that's beside the news. Let's focus on Final Fantasy IX. So here's what they had to say if we translate this to English. Hold on. Final Fantasy IX 25th Anniversary Special Page Release. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Final Fantasy IX Kupo. We will be providing information on commemorative goods and collaborations. And there's a few other tweets here. This tweet says, information 1 of 5. To celebrate the 25th anniversary, new FF9 goods are coming out one after another. There are also figures of Zidane and Garnet, silver accessories, cute stuffed toys of the characters from FF9 Kupo. Now, actually, before we scroll off of this is really interesting. Let me see if I can make this bigger. actually. Fuck, there we go. That should do. So this is really interesting because a lot of people are looking at these figures for Zidane, however you guys want to pronounce it. I believe the official pronunciation is Zidane, though, by the way. This is another Titus situation. Everyone gets mad when I say Titus, even though that's correct. These characters look updated in design. The way their faces are, their proportions are about the same. But this does look like it could be the character models for the characters in Final Fantasy IX Remake. Right? The way their eyes look, the way their hair looks. I mean, this looks like they could have potentially just 3D printed the models. I know they don't necessarily do that, but it does look like these are models straight out of a potential remake. It looks very clean. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I don't know. Would you guys like this style if it was from the remake? I think Garnet looks really good. Is it just me, or does Zidane specifically look like a mix of the original FF9 art style and the Dissidia art style? No, I can totally see it. I can totally see it. Looks polished? Yeah, I agree. So, moving on to the next announcement, a new recording of the FF9 theme song, Melodies of Life, has been released as a commemorative record. The warm LP sound brings back memories, Kupo. And then also to the vinyl artwork is really awesome here. This seems to be an expanded artwork of the 25th anniversary artwork to include all of the playable characters. And I like it. If this is the style of art that they're going for in the remake, then I think it will end up being fairly faithful to FF9. So it looks good. Here is the next announcement. So the next announcement says FF9 has released a picture book with the Black Mage Vivi as the main character, Kupo. A story about Vivi's days with a certain master. It says she, but this is because when Japanese is translated, probably didn't really use gendered pronouns, and then it just kind of assigned one to it. But it says a story about Vivi's days with a certain master. Or wait, is it talking about the master? Actually, wait, no, because talking about no, not of course not. Wait, what the fuck? I don't know. I'll just read it as it says. A story about Vivi's days with the certain master before she sets off on her journey. A Final Fantasy IX picture book, Vivi and Grandpa on the day of departure. Very interesting. So, yeah, I think the translator got the pronouns wrong on that. That's the only thing I can definitely conclude there. I could try taking a look at it there. Yeah, it doesn't even use any pronouns inside of the actual Japanese that I can tell. So it just kind of like it just kind of guessed at like what they would be in English. Definitely Quan, yeah, no question. No question. Should NSP read the book to us on stream when it releases? Okay, I'll read the book. Assuming that the book will get an English release, but I'll read the translation or I'll read it. I'll try to read it in Japanese, but we'll see. Okay, and then let's see. Eyewear brand Zoft and Final Fantasy IX collaboration confirmed. 3 types of collaboration eyewear will be released, each with a limited edition eyeglass, cleaning cloth, and case. Okay. Okay. So yeah, if you want to clean your glasses with Final Fantasy IX chat, you're going to be able to do that. I know a lot of you have definitely needed to do this specifically with FF9. I don't. Yeah, awesome, awesome. How are a lot of these collaborations decided? I don't know. $500 glasses cleaner? You better believe. Hold on, let's see. Can we actually see how much this is going to cost? Because we can click through the link. That doesn't say much. Released in 2000, the ninth installment, which has sold 8.9 million copies worldwide. That's also a big thing we're going to talk about later, is that FF9 is now at 8.9 million. And this actually came through the re-releases, by the way, that they've managed to get the game up that much. Because remember, FF9 at release was like 5 million. So actually the ports have been selling of FF9. And I really think that that's like in large part thanks to like Memoria Engine and Moguri mod. Gohan, thank you so much for the super chat. Gohan9845 says, don't think Kitase would want to remake FF8. He expressed how difficult it would be to remake the junction system. I think FF6 remake seems more likely. I think remaking FF6 would be really difficult, right? Because FF6 has a crap ton of playable characters. The only way I could see them actually remaking FF6 is if it was like HD 2D. Or like maybe like a chibi style, like FF4 remake or something like that. But like actually remaking Final Fantasy VI would be ridiculous, right? Because FF6 has so many characters. So if it was like 7 remake, it would be like the most insane task ever. It would take like 5 parts. It would be insane. But I mean, I wouldn't be opposed if they wanted to do like an HD 2D or a chibi remake of Final Fantasy VI. I would be like more than happy about it. I would be ecstatic. Let's continue. And then the 5th and final announcement is the Final Fantasy IX 25th Anniversary Lottery to be released in July 2025. More details will be announced at a later date, so please look forward to it, Kupo. And Square Enix has updated the sales for Final Fantasy IX. So a little bit of backstory here. Final Fantasy IX, not the highest selling 3D Final Fantasy. In fact, it was notably like the lowest selling 3D Final Fantasy for quite some time, right? Now, the initial PlayStation 1 launch of FF9 sold around 5 million, which definitely is not bad, especially considering at the time they launched it. However, that was on the lower end of the series. But the PC port and the recent PlayStation and Switch ports have almost doubled the sales of FF9. Which is crazy, guys, because that is likely a combination of either new people interested in picking up Final Fantasy, so there is still some interest in FF9, that or a significant portion of people who played FF9, bought FF9 back in the day, still love and want to replay Final Fantasy IX. So you can see why it nearly doubling sales from its initial release is such a massive deal. That means that FF9 still has a lot of love, right? There's still a lot of people who view this as basically one of the greatest games of all time. So that's pretty massive. That's insane. And you can go and play FF9 now with Memoria Engine and things like Moguri Mod that make FF9 basically play like a very, very good remaster right now. And I also think that those mods have also motivated people to either check out FF9 for the first time or go revisit FF9. And if you do go check out FF9 with those mods, you are in for a treat, guys. It is so good to play the games with those mods. You can control battle speed. You can control. There's like a mod to like mod out so that you can swap Tetramaster with Triple Triad. All kinds of stuff. So it's really cool. Do I think the FF9 remake will have voice acting? Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I don't think that there's any question about that. Even if the style of it ends up being like a little bit more like something like Fantasian, where it tends to use like more fixed camera angles and things like that, and it's not like a super cinematic game like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I don't really believe that it is going to be like Final Fantasy VII Remake. I do think it'll have voice acting. No, you don't want the voice acting? Bro, if you don't want the voice acting, I'm sure there'll be an option in the menu to be like, to just set like voice to like 0 out of like 100 or whatever. You can turn off all the voice sounds and then boom, it'll be just like reading the subtitles or whatever, and you can just skip past all the voice acting if you want. Is it bad that I want 9 remake to replace Tetramaster with Queen's Blood? No, it's okay. I thought Triple Triad was undefeated for like 20 years until Queen's Blood came out. And then Queen's Blood became like the best card game in FF. I do think Queen's Blood is like GOAT. It's probably my favorite minigame in FF, period. It's also why, too, I think when people talk about like the mini games in Rebirth, and they have such a cynicism toward a lot of their mini games, I'm like, man, some of them are really good though. Queen's Blood in particular. Honestly, Rebirth probably could have got away with only having Queen's Blood, if I'm really honest, though. Giant Monkey Butt, thank you for the super chat. Vivi is one of the best characters ever, my son. Thematically, Vivi is amazing. He is one of the best FF characters ever. The exploration of life itself and the meaning of life, knowing that you don't have that long, is just really interesting. Really knife in the heart, man. That's the same excuse Pokemon fans make when any other Pokemon fan asks Game Freak to put voice acting in their newer games. Yeah, that's what I'm not about that, man. Like, I'm so not about that. Like, like I know like a lot of Nintendo fans will be like, no, don't add voice acting. I'm like, dude, no. Make Nintendo pay and then just turn the voice acting off. Like, let Game Freak pay, and it's not like they don't have the money, even if it's just to be optional. Like, even if it's a thing you can turn off, make them pay. And then just turn it off. Chocobo Racing and Rebirth is actually way bigger than one might expect, and it's better than the dedicated Chocobo Racing games released recently. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that, like, I do disagree with people on like Rebirth mini games. I do think that they could have like probably cut quite a few of them, and it wouldn't be that bad. It'd probably actually benefit the game. But Oh yeah, and then Fort Condor is actually really good too. Um, I don't know. I thought I like mini games. Listen, and I'm gonna say this as plainly as possible. We have spent 2 decades, guys, 2 decades. That's what the old heads have spent begging for Square Enix to put mini games back in Final Fantasy. Right? The last time we had like a mini game Final Fantasy was like 10, maybe 15 because it has a couple of mini games in it. 14 kinda, I guess, because but I don't know how you group that because it's an MMO, so it better have some other content in it other than battle content. But in terms of the single player games, we have been wanting mini games for so long and been begging for them. And then like there was also too like that huge like backlash when Yoshi P said that 16's World was like too serious for mini games or whatever. So like can we not like can we not tell Square like to stop doing mini games? Thanks. What the fuck is that noise? I'm sorry, I hear a noise. It's bothering me. Anyway, um, what was I going to? Oh, this was the English page. The English page didn't share nearly as much for that. But actually, this is important to point out while we're here. Keep in mind, guys, that it is not just this new merch in the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy 9 that's happening right now. Final Fantasy 14 also recently had an expansion. And guess what game they heavily reference throughout the entirety of that brand new expansion? Final Fantasy 9. So, between everything that's happening with Dawn Trail, between the 25th anniversary, the amount of merch that's coming out, and they have quote unquote new projects along on the way, there does seem to be building a lot of hype for Final Fantasy 9. Prof Noct, what's good, my guy? Oh, I arrived just in time for the jump rope mini game discussion. Listen, I do think that the jump rope mini game should be in there. And y'all thought remake rebirth mini games were tedious. But yeah. If you think about it, most of 16's mini games are QTEs. That's fucking funny. William, thank you so much for the super chat. Do you think FF9 at Switch 2 in 2 days or at the PlayStation show in May? Oh boy. Okay. What a question. What a question. I think the biggest place that they could possibly reveal it is at the Nintendo Switch 2 event. That would definitely turn a lot of heads. But again, Square Enix also has that relationship with Sony. So I don't know. If they reveal it at the Switch 2 event, I do think that will be huge for them promoting the fact that, hey guys, we're multi-platform now. We're coming to all platforms for all our major FF titles at once. The Switch 2 Direct also is going to have a huge number of eyes on it, meaning that they're going to be able to catch a large number of people that currently have like maybe heard that FF9 is one of the greatest games of all time, and they want to be able to go and play it for themselves. So they'll be able to hop from the Switch 2 Direct and go and pre-order their Switch 2 and then immediately look forward to Final Fantasy 9. And, you know, assuming that maybe FF9 Remake is coming within the next year, they would be able to go and maybe even pre-order the game. I'm being a little too wishful there, but at the very least, they'll know that FF9 Remake is on the way and that it's coming for the new platform that they want to buy. And PlayStation heads will probably be watching this show too, and they'll already own a PlayStation and they'll pick it up there. So I think if we're talking purely on strategy, then I would say that the best strategic thing to do would be to reveal Final Fantasy IX at the Switch 2 Direct. Of course, we're going to know in a few days, so that prediction may immediately date itself. And then, this is also really interesting because apparently a Reddit user might have correctly guessed the name of Final Fantasy IX Remake. So here's what it says. There's a couple links, and then it says there's a Final Fantasy there's a Final Fantasy IX 25th anniversary vinyl releasing called Final Fantasy IX 25th anniversary vinyl Timeless Tale that just went online. A previous user 2 months ago mentioned that he/she worked for a company where he/she could see the title Final Fantasy IX Timeless Tale Remake in a comment under a post from this very Reddit thread, Gaming Leaks and Rumors. When questioned whether it could be a TV show, they mentioned it would make 0 sense for it to be a show where I'm seeing it, but weird things have happened. Could be a side game or something. Now, maybe they could have just been lucky with the wording, but that's a really good coincidence at that point. So if the name of the remake is Final Fantasy IX Timeless Tale, I think that's an awesome name for a remake of FF9. Really cool. I think it's better than calling it Final Fantasy IX Remake as well, because it doesn't just, run up against Final Fantasy VII Remake. I also think that it's good that it wouldn't necessarily be called Final Fantasy IX Remake, assuming that this ends up being true, because I think that Final Fantasy VII has already established the name Remake in such a way that means something to Square, if that makes sense. So the name Remake, I would think of something like the new ATB system and the new attention to the cinematics and the new structure that FF7R presents. And FF9's remake is probably not going to be like that. With FF9 Remake, I think the expectation that has been set, both by fans kind of setting it ourselves, and apparently what we've even heard from journalists too, that this is more of a faithful remake. It is turn-based. It does have a world map. It is going to be a lot more traditional to the word remake than something, ironically, like FF7 Remake that's called a remake, but it's really more of what you might think of as a reimagining or a rebuild in the Evangelion sense, etc. And so, yeah, this is more of a remake in the way that Persona 3 Reload is, or in the way that many other remakes that you would think of as a remake, being a remake is. So, yeah. I think FF9 is perfect for Switch. It's way more family-oriented versus the darker tones of, say, 7. Having both present would show a vast audience how varied FF is as a series, i.e. something for everyone. Yeah, I mean, for me, right now, what they're doing in terms of, say, sales is not necessarily working, right? That is to say that, at the very least, the PlayStation exclusivity is not really working. So I do think that maybe trying this, I think maybe trying this from a different angle, like trying it from the Nintendo angle, trying it from a more family-friendly approach is worth doing and seeing how that ends up working out. So yeah, FF9 is pretty dark though. No, I agree. I agree. I guess I mean the presentation of FF9 is not dark, to be clear here. FF9 doesn't have like and like, or I guess to be blunt, compare like FF9 versus like FF16, right? Like, yeah, FF9 does get very thematically dark, but it never has like, the type of explicit darkness that something like 16 has. But I think that's okay. And I actually like FF9 more for that. Not to say that I don't appreciate 16 for like trying to be explicitly dark, by the way. I just think that like there's a certain art to presenting something that is dark, but then also can be presented in a way that like is accessible to people of all ages, right? Like, I don't think anyone would sit here and say that like Avatar: The Last Airbender still isn't awesome as an adult, but like you don't actually get like a lot of the thematic depth as a kid, but then you go back and you watch it as an adult, and then you really start to put things together, and then you're like, okay, well, that's awesome. Oh my god, Resonant Arc, what's up, man? I just started a replay of FF9 yesterday for a future podcast, and it's absolutely the silliest game in the world for its first hours. It really is. It really is. Kind of the polar opposite of the way that like Final Fantasy VII opens, right? Because I think that like Final Fantasy VII, the way it opens, there's a little bit of silliness in there with like Biggs and Wedge. But I think it kind of like overwhelms you with like how serious it is in those first few hours. And then it kind of dials back after that, and then it gets really like it has all of its silly moments. But I do think that yeah, FF9 kind of starts silly and then it locks in and gets a lot more serious as it goes along. But yeah. And I for some people too, that was also kind of why when the game first launched, a lot of people were kind of lukewarm on it because they kind of liked the more serious, and I'm using this word loosely, mature look of like 7 and 8. And so they kind of like disregarded the whimsy of FF9 a lot when it first came out, and the art style and the proportion of the characters, and they were like, this isn't a big mature adult game like FF7 and 8. But a lot of the fans were young at the time. We couldn't really appreciate the art style. We couldn't really appreciate a lot of the greatness that FF9 really had to offer. One of my favorite games of all time, and I still think it's one of the best Zelda games ever, is Majora's Mask. But when Majora's Mask came out, guys, I hated Majora's Mask. I thought it sucked. I was like, how come you couldn't just do Ocarina of Time again? I was like, what is wrong with you? Why are you guys doing this? This time mechanic sucks. And now, I think Majora's Mask is the greatest game ever made. Majora's Mask is like a top like 10 for me, top 5 maybe even. I think that game is so cool. It's one of the best games ever made. Like, the way that game approaches death and the acceptance of death and the stages of grief. My God, man, that game is awesome. But you couldn't tell me that at like, I can't remember how old I was when I first played Majora's Mask, but I was pretty young. However old I was in like, what was it, 2000? Yeah, I was like, this game sucks. And now I'm like, Majora's Mask is like literally the greatest game ever made. It's awesome. So yeah, I love it. I love it. FF9 is quite the same in that way, where I think a lot of people disregarded it at the time. A lot of fans were younger. They didn't really appreciate it. They didn't understand how rich the themes were. They looked at the art style too. And I think they kind of disregarded the game on the art style. And they said, oh, this game looks immature. You know, it doesn't look cool. There's no cool character like Squall. And now I look at the art of FF9 and I'm like, this is the coolest shit ever. I'm like, this is the coolest game ever. Dude, like the aesthetic of FF9 is like one of the most gorgeous aesthetics in Final Fantasy and one of the best video game aesthetics ever made. But we didn't know that at the time, right? You know, it's funny how some of that stuff just ages better as time goes along. And I think that FF9 in general is one of those things where as time has gone along, we developed a much deeper appreciation of it. What do I think they'll tweak about the combat in FF9 are? Well, I think that they're definitely going to make it faster. For sure. Um, that's like one of the biggest complaints about Final Fantasy IX is that the combat is really slow. And I genuinely can't tell you why it's slow, but it is just really slow. And FF7 and 8 weren't like that, but FF9 is. Now, again, if you play this game on Memoria Engine, then you are able to speed the game up. So, again, highly recommend if you're excited for FF9 after seeing all this, going and playing FF9 on Steam using Memoria Engine, Moguri mod, and a lot of the other accompanying mods. There is a video on my channel that shows you how to install the mods and where to get them. They're amazing. It is going to make the game feel basically like a remaster. It's that good. And I'm not even just talking about HD backgrounds or speeding up combat even. You can replace Tetramaster with Triple Triad. Like, there's stuff like that that's like really cool. And just huge quality of life additions. You can even play the game in ultra wide at 120 frames per second. There's just insane quality of life improvements that I highly, 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 highly recommend checking out. Other than that, in terms of combat, as Chad is saying, no auto trans. I think that's also something that everyone in the world is wanting from a Final Fantasy IX remake. Roy Mustang, also, that is an awesome username, awesome character, Roy Mustang. Thank you so much for this super chat. The world of FF9 is magical and has a childlike fairy tale charm to it. It has my favorite locations in FF, like Limblum, Alexandria. I actually don't even know how do you actually pronounce, is it Clara? I don't even know out loud. The backgrounds are so gorgeous with Moguri mod installed. That's also going to be another thing too, is that a lot of stuff is going to be pronounced for the first time. So I hope you guys are ready for that. I hope what do you call it? Yeah, Zidane versus Zidane is going to be a huge deal. It's going to be a huge deal. I wonder what they're going to go with, right? Because the Ketchi Kate Sith thing was also a huge deal. And I took an L because I was team Ketchi all the way. Like, I was team Ketchi. And then it became Kate Sith, and I had to just take the L. But listen, the reason that I was team Ketchi was because I was looking at the game's original pronunciation. I was looking at the original pronunciation behind the character's lore, and it just made sense. I mean, the myth that Ketchi is based on, and so it made sense for the character to be called Ketchi, right? But it's easier for English speakers to just be like Kate Sith. That's an L, brother? No, it's an L because big corpos have said that it's gonna be Kate's Sith brother. I was correct. I was correct. How do they pronounce Zidane in Dissidia? Zidane. Titus is also Titus in Dissidia, by the way. Listen, when I made my Final Fantasy X essay, I think half the comments on there are just like, it's not Titus, it's Titus. And I'm like, dude, I didn't make the fucking game. But if I did, I probably would have pronounced it Titus too. But if I was the voice director or whoever, whoever made the call, localization director, but his name is Titus. Like, canonically, it's Titus. You can look it up. I'm not saying that it's... I'm not saying that that's how it should be or anything like that. But canonically, and if we're being correct, and if we're trying to have, like, a correct discussion about the canon, then his name is Titus. I can never call him Titus. I know it's wrong, but I can't. After I started calling him Titus, I could never stop. And I also believe they call him Titus maybe in World of Final Fantasy 2. James Arnold Taylor confirmed it's Titus 10 years ago. Yeah, it's Titus. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, cope, it's Titus. Vanita Sentiment 13, thank you so much for the super chat. Titus in KH1. Is it Titus in KH1? Interesting. I've wanted to do a replay of KH1 for so long now. NSP, you and many other Final Fantasy channels are a joy to watch. Thanks for helping make the FF franchise more than a game. Wishing you and the channel much more success. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. T. Dussy from NSP's playthrough. So, I do think that Final Fantasy IX, Timeless Tale, if that's what it ends up being called, I think that's awesome. There is one more other thing, too, that I did want to talk about, but I can't really talk too much about it. However, I can talk in the direction of it. I know that sounds like a riddle, but just bear with me. As you guys know, a Final Fantasy IX anime has been in the works for quite some time. And here's the deal. That Final Fantasy IX anime leaked out. However, I don't know if that FF9 anime is going to see the light of day. What I mean when I say that it is leaked out is that essentially kind of like the pitch for the FF9 anime leaked. So originally, I thought that this anime was going to be something like an adaptation of FF9, like a kid show that kids could watch maybe and catch themselves up on FF9 and become indoctrinated into Final Fantasy. But actually, what this was about is about Vivi's children. So apparently, Vivi created like 6 kids using his life force, and the whole thing was going to be about these kids 10 years after the defeat of Kuja. And that's what it was going to be about. And there was going to be like basically a whole sequel series about Vivi's children that takes place. And there are images and other details out there on the internet. But for the sake of me not being drone striked, drone stroked. No, I like drone stroked better, bro. I like drone stroked better. I like drone stroked better. Yeah. Yo. They're good at drone stroke. Yo, bro. They're sending the drones to stroke me right now. Okay. But yes, for the sake of not being drone striked, I'm not gonna show the images, go into details, tell you where you can find the leaks or anything like that. But essentially, that was the premise of the FF9 anime, and it is out there. However, the company itself is going through a lot of financial trouble, and I want to say that the project itself is up for auction. Don't quote me on that because I have to go back and look. But they're going through it, and the general sentiment seems to be that a lot of people don't know if that anime will ever see the light of day, unfortunately. Lawyer, show me where they drone stroke. Oh my god. This is so funny. I need to like, you know what? I need to start making merch of all the things that I miss say on stream. My favorite before was in crazy when I combined insane and crazy together and I said in crazy. Drone stroke, though, drone stroke takes the cake by far. By far, dude. A drone stroking you sounds like a cyberpunk side quest. Yeah, it does. Oh my god. Can we talk about Expedition 33 hype? I know there's nothing new, but just saying. Oh, dude, yes. That's like my most hype game right now. I remember when NSP had an odd pronunciation of Clive and he never heard the name before. Okay, so let me tell you guys like a little bit of like backstory with me and why I say things like wrong all the time. So I have parents that grew up like way, way, way out in the country, way out in the country, middle of nowhere. And they would always pronounce like literally everything wrong, right? Because you got to keep in mind that these are like super country black folks. And so you already, black people, we already make up like our own pronunciations for like half of shit, anyways. And then country people also do that, regardless of race. And so when you combine the two, when you combine the two, you have a whole ton of people who are just making up the sounds of words and just making up like, yeah, making up words, um, calling things the wrong thing. And so, yeah. And then also combine that with the fact that I was slow with language development in general. So I have three things going against me whenever I was born. And unfortunately, I've had to essentially like retrain myself on how to talk better. Now, of course, my parents moved to the city and I live in, civilization. Uh, but for the most part, yeah, like growing up, I learned how to say most words wrong, how to speak wrong, and then I was behind in reading, so I had to catch up in like reading. Um, I am more than likely dyslexic. That tends to correlate pretty heavily with ADHD. So sometimes I read things wrong. Anyway, I had a whole bunch of like speech, language development stuff, and then I had parents from, which is also why whenever you guys tell me that I speak really good and you enjoy listening to me and like that I put things succinctly and I'm such a good orator, however the fuck you say it, it really means a lot to me because I'm like, dude, they thought I couldn't talk or read. They thought I was dumb. So I've come a long way. Drumjohn, thank you so much for the Prime sub. Can't believe this is the first time I use my Prime stuff here. Love your content, NSP. It brightens up any day. Oh, thank you so much, I appreciate that. That means the world to me. Some English words are fucking weird regardless, though. They are fucking weird regardless. So I think it's awesome that I've developed to this point where you guys not only respect it, but love it, even though I say shit weird all the time. Couch Potato, hello, man. So did you actually grow up in the more of a rural side of life? No, actually, I still mostly grew up in Dallas. But you know, you learn to speak from your parents and your grandparents and the family around you. And so I would go to school and people would be like what the fuck? Or like, why are you saying shit like that? It's okay. I was in ESL as a kid. Bro, I was basically ESL, but for someone whose only language is English. I just had like a weird dialect. So actually I just like worked on speaking and presenting myself better and more clearly articulating as I got older. But it just goes to show you that, and I know a lot of people will always be like, "Oh, I wanna be a content creator or something," but I don't think I have like the type of way with words that you have in SP. And I'm like, dude, bullshit. You can still be a content creator. You can still be a content creator. And if I can do it, I just like learned on the job. Like you go back and watch my old videos and like clearly I learned how to express myself from doing this. So I know there are some people who are going to be like, why is it this slow ass turn-based system? FF9 Remake should play more like FF7 Remake. So no, actually, I think this is good. I think this is good for a few reasons. For starters, I think that this is really going to set the tone on what people are wanting from, like, how should I say this? I think it is going to maybe so there's been a lot of debate on turn-based versus action and all this other stuff. I think it would be great to see how an actual turn-based Final Fantasy does in 2025 or 26 or whenever FF9 Remake does end up coming out. So I would love to see if those games end up performing well, how people do react to this stuff, if it does end up becoming a great newcomer Final Fantasy game. I raise these questions in part because I genuinely don't know how they're actually going to play out. Like, I genuinely don't know how that stuff will be received in this day and age by new people playing it for the first time. I don't know if their reaction would be the same as ours, if they would think it's lame. Part of me just thinks that making a Final Fantasy game like that, just to see what happens, is interesting. Like in the modern era. I also think it's great, too, that I can refer this game to people and say, hey, go play this. So that you can kind of get like the ultimate feel of like what Final Fantasy is about. And I think that that's generally true of 9 anyway. Right? Like, it's generally true that, like, if you play FF9, it's kind of in a lot of ways the most distilled Final Fantasy that you can play. So having an updated version of FF9 and say, hey, go play FF9 Remake and you can truly get Final Fantasy. Because right now, kind of like if you want to get someone into Final Fantasy, a lot of people are like, oh, go play 10, right? Because 10 is kind of this mix between new Final Fantasy and old Final Fantasy. It's right in between the cross section. So it's kind of like, oh, go play FF10 and you can kind of get the full picture of FF, right? Like you can kind of like really understand FF's past and FF's present a lot just by playing FF10. So I think that FF9 Remake would actually serve as this sort of like in between one. Or I think FF9 Remake could serve basically as this game that allows people to get Final Fantasy again. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, really grasp into like a pure distilled Final Fantasy and understand these are all the base conventions: the airship, the world map, the party members. And then these are how the modern games kind of play off of those things and change those things and really understand them. So I think it'll be fun to see the reaction to a Final Fantasy IX remake. I also think it'll be really telling if Final Fantasy IX remake outsells some of the recent games. I don't expect it to, but I also think that would be really funny. Like, I think that'd be like the funniest thing that could humanly happen. I don't think it will, but if it does, it'll be hilarious to me. My greatest hope actually though with remaking Final Fantasy IX would actually be if FF9 remake can be the I guess my greatest hope is that if FF9 remake can serve as the base for its own style of game going forward that basically makes new classic Final Fantasy games in Final Fantasy IX style, if that makes sense. Or or in the PS1 style, right? So like if they continue to make PS1 style FF games, and FF9 remake is like the base for that. Does that make sense? Like they create like an entire spin-off series just dedicated to making PS1 FF games. And then the mainline series continues to be some modernized FF style, like Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think that would also be really interesting. Well, Jira, thank you so much for the Prime sub. I appreciate it. Like Octopath, but FF9? Right, exactly. So suppose they start making like new original Final Fantasy games that are in the PS1 style, right? And then there's like a Final Fantasy like classic. And then there's Final Fantasy Modern. And the Final Fantasy Modern is something more like 7R, right? And so you have these two series where it's like Final Fantasy Modern and then Final Fantasy Classic. And they continue to make classic FF games as like this like sub-series. And they can put the Final Fantasy Classic games on Switch as well. Or Switch 2 rather. And those games would do really cool. I think those games would actually do numbers. Because a lot of the veterans who kind of defected would definitely come back. If FF9 Remake does it well, it could lead to new PS1 style FF games. Best outcome? Right. I've been saying this for a long time, that if Square Enix was smart, there would be two Final Fantasy series, FF Modern and FF Classic. FF Modern would take the Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy battle system, and it would continue to make new games based on that. And FF Classic would basically take FF9 Remake and continue to make classic FF style PS1 games or Super Nintendo style games. And that way, everyone is going to be getting some type of Final Fantasy that appeals to them, and the veterans would not keep dropping off, and you'd be able to have a space to attract new people to Final Fantasy. Because the problem right now is they keep creating new stuff at the risk of jeopardizing their established audience, but then failing to attract that many new people as well. So you have to do something about the veterans, and you have to do something about the new people. Just make two fucking series. It's easy. Call them both Final Fantasy. Why is this so hard? Subtext, thank you for the super chat. Even though I know the answer, I'm going to ask, did you see Max's long chat about the identity of Final Fantasy and how based it was? Oh my God, bro. I love Max. I love Max. And I loved him even more after he did that. And I loved him even more after he did that. Again, already a Max stan. Already love the guy. But yeah, if you haven't seen that rant, I do recommend checking out like one of his previous VODs because it was actually pretty good. I do think that he did it really well, where he talked about You know, Re-Trilogy essentially being a good base for FF games going forward. What did he say? Everything that I've basically been saying. But he said it with more riz, as he often does. And it was great. I can see SE taking the Sega-like approach with their Sonic series and making games for both camps, classic and modern. Thank you so much, Vanita's sentiment. Yeah, you're right. Sega does it. Nintendo does it. Nintendo does it with Mario, and they do it with Zelda, right? You have 2D Mario still. 2D Mario is still a thing that exists. And 3D Zelda and 2D Zelda are things that still exist, right? Like, the new thing existing and like the way in which you approach getting new fans doesn't mean that you have to stop making games for the old fans. You can make both. You can make both. Metroid does it now too. Yeah, Metroid does it now too. And it's just like, if you make both, you can have two money instead of one. I literally don't get it. And we have FF spinoffs like all the time. So why can't like you just have a dedicated spinoff series that is purely dedicated to doing that? I literally don't understand. I literally don't understand like why that is not a thing. Like it blows my mind that it hasn't even been considered. He also made it clear it would take 10 years for them to make Rebirth with all of its content, but it only took them 3.5 years because there was a strong base to build from. Yeah, and that's the thing, man, is that a lot of people, I guess, how should I say it? There's so many resources that go into making modern games now. And honestly, Final Fantasy, like, completely 100% redoing everything every single time, I've yet to really like see any tangible evidence that that is actually helping the franchise and not hurting it. Like I've yet to see hard evidence that that has actually been smart to do. You can talk all day about it being like about how much it should aspire to do it or why it should aspire to do it, um, about how like artistic it is, whatever. But no one can actually present to me hard evidence objectively that that has been beneficial to them. There's more evidence to the opposite, precisely. There's more evidence that it's just been hurting. That like ignoring the things that fans have been asking for has probably been more of a detriment than like a thing that's like actually uplifting them, right? And I think we just hit a point where it's become impossible to ignore, but yeah. You think it's going to be better than FF7 Rebirth? Better is subjective. I think it's going to resonate better for some people, probably, though. Because, again, some people really like classic FF style. So I think it's going to click better for them. Better objectively, though, or better to me? I don't know. I really like both. So I don't know if it'll be better or not. Let me play it first. Then I'll I'll know for sure. Metaphor Refantasio is a great proof for this. Could not have been made without the basics of Persona, and now it'll be a whole new thing. I mean, right. The idea for Chrono Trigger, again, because I always compare it to this, is that Chrono Trigger, their idea was to combine Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest together, and to make like a third new thing. Um, Whittling down Final Fantasy's identities to magic and summons is bad since most modern RPGs right now do that better. Ironically, FF needs to evolve by going back to its roots. That is probably the best way to put it, right? Because like again, just from like being objective about it, from like a brand perspective, I do think that a brand has to be something more than just Aga Magic and like Shiva, right? Like it, there has to be more to like what the expectations of these games are. And I know to some people that sounds limiting, but I actually think it makes the game's more creative in a weird way. William, thank you so much for the super chat. How do you think FF9R airship travel compared to FF7R3 airship travel? Well, FF9R kind of because tease of what to expect. But, oh, well, it kind of tease what to expect, but better. No, I think they're going to be entirely different. I think that FF9 airship travel is going to like literally be um, just like a visually appealing PS1 style airship travel, honestly. Like I don't think it's going to be anything like Retrilogy, Unreal Engine, a hyper fidelity graphics. I mean, they both might be Unreal Engine, but I don't think it's going to be. I guess the best way for me to say this is that I don't think that this is like a bleeding edge AAA game, like on the upper tier of AAA game, like Final Fantasy VII Remake is. I think that this is going to be like high AA, low AAA remake, and not be like a God of War budget game, would be my estimate. So I don't think the airship travel will be like a tease. I think there'll be two completely different types of airship travel, and but I think they'll both be well received by fans because at the end of the day, I don't think that doing one style of airship travel versus another style of airship travel is going to be the divisive thing. I think that there is more unison actually in just the airship fucking returning in general. Like I think more people just care about that. I think more people just care about there being a goddamn airship in the first place than like regardless of however it ends up controlling or however it ends up working. That at least we're trying to do that thing again that people like really associate with the series. So um are we setting ourselves up for disappointment if 9 remake isn't shown for the Switch 2 presentation? Um yes, dude, my guy. And so my belief is to not set your expectations for the Switch 2 presentation. I would personally not set my expectations for the Switch 2 the presentation. The reason is because it would be very easy for it to not show up there. I feel like, and they're announcing all of this like 2 days before. That's a little weird. I feel like they would just save it for afterward if they were going to announce it. I feel like there is going to be some time between when the announcement happens and um this. So I don't know. Summer Games Fest feels more likely somehow. Right, because if you remember when Rebirth was announced earlier in the year, we got the Final Fantasy 25th anniversary logo, and then Summer Games Fest happened, and then it was announced there. I agree actually that Summer Games Fest is a much more likely place to announce it than the Switch 2 Direct. But I do think it's coming to Switch 2, to be clear. I do think it is coming to Switch 2. But I think the big Switch 2 Direct announcement is going to be Final Fantasy VII Remake for Switch, by the way. Like, I think if you're looking for a big FF announcement on Switch 2, it's going to be that. It's going to be Final Fantasy VII Remake is coming to Switch. And the reason I say that, by the way, is because we've had so many goddamn rumors that FF7R is coming to Switch that I believe it. I 100% believe it. FF7R Part 1 at least already runs insanely flawless on the Steam Deck. And so to me, it just makes a crap ton of sense if FF7R is coming to Switch. I don't know if 16's coming, actually, by the way. There's been no rumors on it. And oddly enough, with 16, there's been like a weird lack of support with that game. I thought that game was gonna get like more quality of life stuff, I guess. Because Yoshi P said that there was a plan, like an 18-month plan for that game to sell. And like I guess it was the PC port and like putting Clive in Tekken. But it really didn't feel like a plan. You know what I'm saying? Like a plan. Like he's like, I'm really gonna like promote the hell out of the game in the 18 months. I don't know. It just really didn't feel like that for me. I think 7R is totally being announced. Oh, 100%. 100%. I don't know if they're gonna announce Rebirth at the same time. So if they do bring Rebirth to Switch 2, Rebirth is probably gonna be like at a later point. I don't know how many people are going to buy 7R on Switch 2, by the way. Like, I legitimately have no idea how that's going to perform. I think it can do really well in... I think it could do really well in Japan, maybe? That's kind of where my eye is at. Like, my eye is going to be on Japan and seeing if it performs to expectations there. I don't expect anyone in the West to really care too much. I don't know about you guys, but like when it comes to like high fidelity games for me, I just don't want to play it on a Switch. Like even if it runs fine, I just don't want to play it on a Switch. I'd rather play it on, you know, a more powerful piece of hardware than a Switch, but I guess not everyone thinks that way. So some people don't care about the resolution and frame rates and stuff like that. But I mean, you know, the reason I prefer a Steam Deck in the first place is because I don't have to like choose between the two. I can get the higher resolution version, and if I want to play a little bit on the go, I can. But like, now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of games that are good for Switch too, as well. Like, if I'm playing something that's, you know, Nintendo, or if I'm playing something that's not as, you know, high up there graphically, like a AAA game, then yeah, like most other stuff, yes. But if it's a big AAA game, I wouldn't want to play it on Switch. I see we're talking strictly resolution and not screen size. I'm talking about both, and frame rate too. I'm talking about all three things. Really. But, and also controls as well. I don't want to play it on a Switch on Joy-Cons usually as well. Again, that's when we're talking about big AAA action type titles. I would rather play those on a PS5 or PC, right? Like, I don't know. If God of War was on Switch, I still wouldn't want to play it on Switch. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would probably play it on Steam Deck maybe for a little bit, but I still would want to play it on a TV screen on a PlayStation or a PC. What is the news about FF9 Remake? You may want to rewind the stream. NSP confirmed Joy-Con hater. I'm not a Joy-Con hater. I do like Joy-Cons. I actually think that they're a pretty genius controller all around. They're probably one of the coolest controllers ever made. However, they're flimsy as fuck, for one. But they're also just not like, they're great for what they are and what they're meant to accomplish. But there's a reason that people still buy pro controllers for their Switch. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Joy-Cons are cool as hell, but at the end of the day, there's a reason that everyone has like a wired or wireless pro controller that they use for like the more serious games. And if you ever saw someone playing Smash with Joy-Cons, you'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? Right? You would not like be like, you would not be cool about that. You'd be like, yo, what the fuck are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm just playing Smash. With the Joy-Con, brother? With the Joy-Con? The drift is real? Yeah. Nintendo does have a history of innovative but breakable controllers? Yeah. That's another thing, too, is that I always fear I'm going to break it. So do you guys remember back when Smash came out for 3DS and there was all those people who broke the circle pad off of their 3DS because they were playing Smash on like a fucking 3DS circle pad? Well, guess who was fucking one of those people who broke his fucking circle pad off of his 3DS XL? Me, I broke that fucking thing. Guess what game I was playing? Smash. So yeah, Nintendo controllers definitely breakable for sure. If Switch 2 mouse cons start drifting, so God help me, I know. My ex-roommate literally threw a Wii controller through our window during Wii Sports Tennis. That's amazing. That's awesome. I actually wore the strap every time I played because I was responsible. My PS5 controllers were all perfect for 3 years, and then at once all three of them got the drift strangely. That's so tragic. None of my controllers have started drifting, thankfully. I've not had an issue with drift. The only controller I've had break in recent memory was a DualShock 4 controller. And basically what happened is that I believe it was the L2 or the R2, one of the triggers stopped working on it. And that was really unfortunate. So I had to buy a new controller. But I dropped that thing like a hell of a lot. And I'm not too surprised that it stopped working. Very unfortunate. But I eventually got a new DualShock controller, and it was cool. I'm annoyed that DualSense is called DualSense and not DualShock 5. In my head, I still call it DualShock 5, by the way. I only call it DualSense so that nerds will piss off and not have like a hissy fit like when I say DualShock 5, because that's what that thing should be called. Okay. They tried to pull a fucking like PS Vita. That thing should have been called PSP2 as well. But then Nintendo did the fucking Xbox 360 thing and was like Nintendo 3DS. So now we have +1 number on you. Okay. Right? It's kind of like how like Samsung, now with their phones, like they try to reference the year so that their number looks bigger than iPhone. I hate that shit. I have to like really wonder if that like even works. Like, do people like really think like, oh my God, Xbox 360 is such a bigger number than 3. So I'm gonna buy I'm gonna buy the 360 because Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's so silly. Like, why do you even need Kingdom Hearts like 3 or 4 when there's Kingdom Hearts 358? Dude, that's the bigger number. Even if you divide it by 2, that's still the bigger number. Xbox consoles naming schemes make no sense. Dude, it's so bad, man. Like, it's already hard enough, to send parents to the store and be like, hey, mom and dad, get me like PlayStation 2, 3, At least that was easier. But now you have to tell them the difference between Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. And they need to know the difference between one unit having more horsepower than the other one, and therefore it can play the games at higher resolution and higher frame rates. But then the parents are asking, wait, so both Xboxes can play the same games? But then, bro, it gets even worse. Because you also have the last generation, Xbox One, right? Which is not to be confused with the first Xbox, which most people, like PlayStation, we would say PS1 to refer to, well, the first PlayStation. Even though, it gained that name in retrospect because it was just called PlayStation. We now call it PlayStation 1. So now, anyone who would call the first Xbox Xbox One, they can't do that anymore. So now it has to be Xbox and then Xbox One. So I want the Xbox One. What? You want the first Xbox? No, no, no. I want Xbox One, which is actually Xbox 3. Stupid. Dumb. Infuriating. It makes no goddamn sense. And then it somehow got even worse than Xbox One with Xbox Series, because you have Xbox Series S and X, which first of all, distinguishing the letter S and X, two letters, two sounds that sound so similar to each other, is ridiculous. Cartel Del, thank you so much for the tier 1, brother. I worked on Halo when Xbox was coming out. It was Xbox One was coming out. It was aggressively mocked internally. Oh my God, that's. But see, that's when you know that shit is so bad, right? Like when internally people are cooking you for the shit that some other department like came up with, right? That's really bad. That's really fucking bad. I feel like, like you need to listen. If people in your own camp are like, dude, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? Then maybe we shouldn't do it. It's insane how Xbox are still feeling the impact of Xbox One's hype cycle. Yeah, no, I mean, Xbox was over when Xbox One was first announced, and they completely botched the announcement of the new generation, and it never recovered from that moment. That E3, where they spent most of the E3 talking about television and how you can feed the HDMI through your television through the Xbox, that was the moment that Xbox was cooked for like the next decade plus. Pretty much like cooked Xbox to the point of where we may not even be getting a new Xbox next generation. That was just such a bad presentation. First of all, it was short-sighted because nobody cares about TV anymore. I mean, no one cared about TV really then, right? Like we were tuning in because we wanted to see games. And Sony's presentation was very much predicated on what games that you were going to be playing, right? And Microsoft's was basically about TV and like all these other features and very, very little about games. And no one cared about, recording your favorite television shows and stuff like that. Listen, if they had that feature, in the late 90s or early 2000s, that shit would have blown the fuck up. People would have cared, right? But when they revealed that, it was during the time that we were transitioning away from cable TV and we were transitioning to streaming services, right? Like that's when that was beginning. So their entire presentation was predicated on features that no one would even give a fuck about in like not even at the time, but definitely not in a year or two later. Like it was just like no one cared. Will you learn the hard way that naming your console incorrectly can destroy the casual parent trying to buy the next holiday season gift? Yeah, exactly. Because they think the Wii U is a gamepad add-on for the Wii. And it made things even worse when, one, they made the console look exactly like the Wii. So if you saw the Wii U, most casual people wouldn't readily distinguish that this was a new console. It was the same, like, glossy white. And then, two, they never even showed the console. They only showed the gamepad because the gamepad was like the new revolutionary feature. And because of that, most people thought it was a peripheral for the Wii that they already own. They didn't think that it was a new thing. And so it ended up being a failure. And it's just so funny because all they had to do was call it Wii 2. And then it would have, that was it. And then that was it. Wii 2. And I think we would have had an entirely different chain of events that happened. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that like calling it Wii 2 alone would have saved it like completely, but I think it would have went on. Its lifespan would have lived for quite a bit more period of time, and it also too would have definitely sold more. Do you think them naming it just Switch 2 is a good idea? Yes. Yes, I do think it's a great idea. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think there is no better idea. I know some people are like Super Nintendo Switch is like what they wanted. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. Listen, I'm a boomer too. I would love it being called Super Nintendo Switch. I think that's awesome and nostalgic. But here's the reality of it. If you tell somebody that it's a Super Nintendo Switch and they don't have the context, they would think it's like a Pro unit or some type of new iteration of Switch off of the first Switch. I think it was great when Super Nintendo, happened. But like in today's day and age, where everyone gets their news from reading headlines that have been posted on Twitter, um, I just don't think it's a good idea. I think calling it Switch 2 is the smarter move. It's not cool, but it's smart and it works, and that's more important than the name being cool. But also, Nintendo names are never cool. I think Switch is like the closest time they ever got to being having a cool name. Their names are always like their names are always kind of goofy, really. Like, and not just Wii either. I mean, think about Nintendo 64, right? The name of the console is like a fucking number. And 64, right? And then if you actually look in to see like why it's called 64, oh, it's because it has a 64-bit processor. Brother, who gives a fuck? What does that even mean? What does that even mean? What does it mean that it has a 64-bit processor to like normal people? Like, what does that fucking mean? They don't even know what, they don't even know. They don't know and they don't care. I guess like the idea was to be like, oh, it's so advanced because it's 64. But like no one knew what the fuck that meant. Meanwhile, meanwhile, Sony's I feel like Sony's marketing or Sony's name for PlayStation is like pretty straightforward, you know, at the time. It's called PlayStation because it's the station where you play. Oh shit, let's go. Let's go. It makes sense. I understand that. I don't know what the fuck 64 bits do, but I understand that it's called PlayStation because it's the station where you play. That makes sense. 360 does seem worse because you spin around and end up in the same place you started. I know it's really dumb. It's really dumb. But and then here's like what's worse about that too, because 360 and Xbox One basically have like the same reason behind their name. They're like it's called 360 because it's a full circle around like all of your entertainment needs. And then they're like it's called Xbox One because it's the one place that you like need to go for all your entertainment needs. So I'm like, "Oh my god, y'all are so dumb. That's the same shit twice." That you said for why it's called that makes me. Vanitas, thank you so much for the super chat. The Switch Lite should have been called the Light Switch. Ah, that's funny. Thank you so much for your super chat. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think GameCube was like the worst name, but I think the design of it is loved now. Like most people look at the GameCube design with fondness, but man, chat, if you were alive back then, or if you were alive enough to have memories back then, it was one of those things that it would age well, but it would not do well at the time because people looked at the GameCube's design and they were like, this thing looks like a lunchbox. It's ugly. It has a handle on it. And people felt like it was atrocious at the time in terms of design. And, meanwhile, I think that the first Xbox, and I hate that I have to fucking call it the first Xbox and not Xbox One. But the first Xbox and um, PlayStation 2 at the time just looked cooler. But you also got to understand, too, though, is that kids don't really like the kid friendly thing. They like the thing that they think is adult. So you don't make something that's like, oh, this is going to target like, a younger audience. In reality, what you do is that you make it so that it's accessible for them, but then you advertise it to them as being cool and more mature, and then they actually gravitate to it because they think that they're being more mature than they actually are, if that makes sense. Um, Nintendo 64 isn't even the first 64 console. In the 80s, the Commodore 64 was called 64 because it had 64 kilobytes of RAM. That's so true. And even then, well, I guess only the hardest core nerds were like buying computers back then. So maybe it made like a little bit more sense to be like 64 kilobytes of RAM because that had a little bit more context to it. But to a mainstream audience of gamers at that time and parents who had no idea what the fuck 64-bit meant, they were just like, oh, okay. 64 is just a cool number, obviously. Yeah, it is. I was watching a documentary on Sega and they were talking about how they just throw that out just to sound good most of the time. Okay, so Sega objectively has the best console names ever. Like it's not even fucking close. Dreamcast, Saturn, Genesis, okay? Fucking cooked, okay? Like they cooked with that shit, dude. They cooked. Like Dreamcast, dog. Oh, come the fuck on, dude. That's such a cool name. That's such a full. Oh my god, dude. Yeah, the Master System, the Mega Drive, dog. Oh my god, dude. Sega names, bro. Sega names, bro. Sega, dude. They had the best names. They had the best names. I don't even think it's close. Um, Sony has only really had like one name, and that's PlayStation. And I think I think it's solid. I do. So I can't really complain too much. The only Sony name I've ever not liked was PlayStation Vita because I just thought that that was stupid. I thought that they Game Gear, you're right. Game Gear. Too true, King. Yeah, I thought that the name PlayStation Vita was just like a massive ass L. Like that was just an L to me. Because again, it just goes back to like what is a Vita? Like what does that mean? And then they have to explain the meaning behind Vita, right? They have to explain like what the fuck Vita even means. I'm like, dude, if you gotta explain to me like what it means, you've already lost me. Like I'm already lost. Like I already don't care. Yeah, it means life, a bit pretentious. Yeah, dude, it was super pretentious. I think if they called that thing PSP2, I think we might even have PSP3 out right now. I do. I think we'd have PSP3 and it'd be like a Switch competitor. But I don't think that we'd have. It's not that deep though. Like, you mean like the whole Vita thing, like the name itself? PlayStation names for things are never good. Right, exactly, right? Like think about how like I mean, even PSP, which is like a really like simple name, I feel like is so good, right? Like PlayStation Portable. And guess what, bro? Guess what? That's exactly what it is. It's a PlayStation that's portable. Like that's exactly like what it is. And I'm not gonna lie, I think this is a hot take, but I feel like the only people that would disagree with me are like people that would like that are like hard, like so baked into like Nintendo and their ecosystem that they would disagree. But I feel like PSP was far and away the cooler console between it and the DS. Like I felt like PSP was a way cooler system. Now I would possibly agree that the DS just had more games on it, but I felt like the DS's like 3D graphics and such were just like so primitive at the time to me. Again, this is like my perspective as like a kid growing up with both of these devices. I felt like the graphical capabilities of the DS were so limited at the time that it wasn't as appealing to me. And I remember hating all of the touchscreen gimmicks, all the touchscreen stuff and the stylus and the dual screens. Like I kind of was just I kind of just didn't like most of it. 90% of the time I hated it actually. I was just like I don't like the dual screens. There's no analog stick, and the PSP already had issues because it didn't have a second stick, which it should have. Um, and yeah, it just was like, man. So I felt like the PSP was a much cooler console to me than the Nintendo DS. The best DS games were 2D, yeah, because the 3D sucked ass, and there wasn't even like a proper stick, and so there were like basically attempts to try like controlling the character in 3D through the touchpad on a lot of games, and it sucked. But like, what's so funny to me is that they put an analog stick on the Nintendo 64 controller for the purpose of controlling characters in 3D. Because they realized an analog stick made more sense for controlling characters in 3D. And the first game that they made to demo that with was Super Mario 64. Made perfect sense. Absolutely revolutionary. So I cannot for the fucking life of me, maybe there's a Nintendo expert out there that can explain it. So I can't for the fucking life of me think how they made the DS with the launch title Mario 64 DS and did not consider, hey, we made this game because you need to control it. We made this controller have an analog stick because you need to control it with an analog stick for it to feel smooth. And then they didn't fucking include an analog stick. They made you play it with the D-pad. Someone please fucking explain to me why they thought that was a good idea. Because that was a terrible idea. I don't understand what the fuck they were thinking with that. It was so bad. And honestly, Mario 64 DS is actually a really cool game and adds so much to Mario 64. But like 90% of like why that's not the definitive version of that game is that they were like, oh yeah, it doesn't need an analog stick. Just dumb. And yeah, I didn't like it. That 3DS era was a rough time. Then we had the Wii selling like crazy with the motion gimmicks. That caused my entry into the game industry, being stuck making Kinect games that nobody would ever play. Oh my god, you're making Kinect games? That's so hilarious. I'm sorry, dog. I'm sorry that happened. Kinect was kind of like cool technology, but yeah, no one really cared that much. What's funny is that they could probably make Kinect now, and if they were to make a brand new Kinect, it would actually probably unironically be like amazing. Like if they were to make Kinect in this day and age. But I wouldn't want them to do it because I still wouldn't fucking care about the Kinect. But they could make a really cool one now. Yeah, 64 DS lets you play as Yoshi, Luigi with a bunch of new levels. Looks so cool. No, it is cool. It's really cool. I played it. And I love Super Mario 64, by the way. Actually, Super Mario 64 is like the first game in my life I ever like 100%ed as a kid. I got all 120 stars and saw Yoshi on top of Peach's castle. And it was like the most amazing thing ever at the time. It was amazing, but also frustrating because as I got to the top of Peach's castle, I then had to realize that you cannot fucking control Yoshi. They just literally put this Yoshi asset in here from a time when they were experimenting with the idea of maybe having Yoshi in the game. But then they were like, nah. And so they cut him. But they were like, we're going to stick the asset. We're going to stick the asset in there on top of Peach's castle and be like, hey, glad you found this, man. We couldn't put this shit in the game, but you know, here's an asset that shows that we modeled Yoshi just in case. Right. And so everyone was like, when is Super Mario 128 going to come out? And then we're going to be able to control Yoshi. The annoying thing about Kinect is that we would have to make the games work without Kinect so we could test it easy in the studio. Then Microsoft would tell us to delete the controller options before we were released. Oh my god. No. No. Oh my god. Bro. No way. That's so annoying. I'm glad that Connect failed, honestly. I'm glad Connect failed. That shit was like, it was dumb, bro. I haven't been able to play a 3D Mario's since 64 as a kid for some reason. Sunshine, Galaxy, and Odyssey never appealed to me. Really, I liked Galaxy a lot. Mario Galaxy games were like brilliant to me. I think that honestly, I think Mario Galaxy 2 is probably some of the most fun I've had playing a game. Just pure fun. I haven't played Odyssey just because I don't know. I haven't like really been able to get into a platformer in like a really long time. I'm sure that if I bought Odyssey, I'd probably have like a really good time with it. But yeah, I just haven't like had the urge to like really sit and play a platformer. I haven't played much of Astrobot either. I only played a little bit at a friend's house, and then that was it. But Astrobot actually seems really fun. Like as I played Astrobot, I was like, maybe I would actually play more of this. This is like a really fun, relaxing game. But yeah, Astrobot is good. Astrobot's incredibly good. I didn't really get the hype before behind it until I played a little bit of it, and then I kind of like did it start clicking for me, and I was like, okay, I get why people care about this like this so much. It's cool. I had an Xbox with Kinect, and it was hot mic. So if I was playing NBA 2K and cursed, the referees would hit me with a technical foul. What the fuck? Is that for real? That's crazy. Is that really like a mechanic in that game? That's actually kind of fucking funny. And like, did that even work? Like when you were playing single player, like if you're just like in your room and you like drop an f bomb, it would still like give you a foul. That's actually really funny. It's weird how Odyssey was a slam dunk of a game and had little to no post launch support at all. Not that I'd advocate too much of it, but I'm surprised it never got a major DLC. Yeah. I mean, like I mean that just kind of seems like the Nintendo way for a lot of stuff now. Well, not necessarily because they do support like some of their games. I'm still surprised that like Final Fantasy 16 didn't get anything too much support wise. I think it got like a few things, but none of it really addressed any of the feedback that people had, like a difficulty mode being added to it that people would have really enjoyed. None of that. So I was like really surprised that like all that stuff got skipped over. There also aren't any rumors for it coming to Switch 2, which I also find kind of surprising. All the rumors are about Remake. So if we don't see like a Switch 2 port of FF16, that's kind of like that's insane to me, but I'm guessing the 18-month plan didn't go that well and they decided to move on to other projects. Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the 18-month plan was other than the PC port. I guess the DLCs and Tekken, Clive for Tekken, but it just seemed like they had like a lot of stuff in the pipeline is the way he made it sound, but what the fuck was there even there, right? Like I was expecting something like FF15 or like cuz that game had like a 2-year plan for how they continued to support it. And bear in mind that FF15 got updates from when it released in late 2016 all the way through 2019. So 15 had 2.5 years of post launch support. And not only did it have that, it had plans for basically another year of post launch support. So the game would have went on and have been supported from 2016 all the way through late 2020, where season 2 is supposed to conclude. And it would have went past even the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. Final Fantasy 16's 2-year plan became a 5-year plan that got shortened down to 3 years, right? Yes. But here's the thing, though. If Final Fantasy 15's plan, the original plan that Tabata had with the game, if they continued that, I think that FF15 would have become like a 15 to 20 million seller. At least a 15 million seller. At least. Because I think the modding support alone, God, they canceled the fucking modding tools. But if they didn't cancel the modding tools and people were able to go and mod the game, still, it would have been a lot better. And it would have sold a lot more. And the DLCs would have helped a lot too. And the game would have kept selling. And for whatever reason, 15 was so interesting, right? Because at the same time that people hated the game, they also were weirdly obsessed with it too. And seeing like the turnaround, there was kind of this weird investment in like seeing if they could actually fix it. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like, I would make a video about, all the latest updates on 15. I'm like, hey guys, look at all the stuff they're fixing and adding to the game. And people were very hooked in and intrigued about like if they were finally going to fix and complete the game. Like, that was the big question. Like, could they complete the game still even after it launched? And those videos have crazy numbers of views on them. Views that I don't even think that any of the more recent FF games like really get in the same way. People were very interested in that game because everyone knew the potential was massive. I mean, yeah, I think that like if FF15 actually enacted its potential, then I think it would have been the best FF game of all time. Like, if it lived up to the potential that and the aspirations that Final Fantasy Versus 13 wanted it to live up to, then it would have been probably the best game in the series. And I think everyone kind of intuitively thought the same thing because they looked at what the game wanted to do, and also the fact that it wanted to carry over a lot of the stuff from the older Final Fantasy games that people miss. Like in like one of the earlier builds of Versus 13, there was a world map that you could traverse, like a traditional PS1 style looking world map, but with PS3 quality graphics on it. And that shit would have went crazy if they actually like finished that and rolled that out, but eventually evolved into like a hyper realistic open world. And Versus is so ambitious it still can't be realistically realized in the current gen. I mean, not without it being a trilogy like Final Fantasy VII re-trilogy, which is where I think Nomura even got the idea to do an FF7 remake like that, is because I think that I think the original, I mean, we more or less know this now, is that Versus 13 was going to be a trilogy. Like, it evolved into that during development, where he essentially got the aspiration to when evolve it from just one game into three. And then the problem is that when Final Fantasy 15 rolled around, they had to condense three games back into one game, and then they had to remove stuff like Reaper worship because you can't have Death God worship in like a whole bunch of regions apparently in the world. But I think primarily what Tabata was talking about in that was that you can't have Reaper worship in China. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, and they wanted to release the game in China, but Kingsglaive going from a full game to a movie was an interesting choice. Okay, so listen, I knew that FF15 was cooked. Like the moment I knew that like the game was probably cooked was the active time report when they announced that the game was going to remove the Insomnia invasion and put it into Kingsglaive. I remember watching that with in like disbelief that they were going to remove the opening of the game, the part of the game that I had fantasized about playing for years, for almost a decade at the time, that was going to be put into a movie. And so in a way, it was like the game had already kind of died at that point. You know what I'm saying? Like because the part of the game they had been selling you on for a decade was not going to actually exist. Right? Because all of the opening scenes, the very first scene with like the game being removed, I would have rather you remove the Leviathan fight or anything else in the game than have removed that opening. Because I feel like that opening was so important because that was the thing that everyone watched and thought was so cool. And when you watch those old Versus 13 trailers, you were like, that is the coolest thing in the fucking world. And the reason people even got interested in the project in the first place was because of that. And so as I looked at that, I was like, why even keep Noctis and the other characters then? Just delete them all together, right? Like if we're gonna delete Stella, then we might as well just delete Noctis and all the characters together and not call this Versus 13 or not like, you know, carry any Versus 13 stuff over and just make it a new thing that's Final Fantasy 15. And I do think in hindsight that I probably would rather Final Fantasy Versus 13 just be canceled or have been like canceled outright than it had been converted to 15, because I feel like too much of the game ended up being restricted around what they thought, you know, people were kind of expecting from Versus 13, but they couldn't live up to it. Right. And so I would rather Versus 13 be like this canceled thing that could have gotten picked back up at a later point than them having to struggle with it and not even really want to use the characters and direction and stuff, but still forcing it through anyway because that's what they had to do. Did you see the recent FF Union video where FF7 and 9 were going to get enhanced ports on PS2 in the same vein as FF12 Zodiac Age? Yeah, a really, 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 really long time ago, I actually made a video on this myself. And that's a lesser known thing, was that they were planning to, at the time they were calling them remakes, but I assume they were more like remasters of Final Fantasy 7 through 9 for PS2. I assume that they weren't remakes as they were calling them, because if they were remaking all those games in the style of Final Fantasy X, that would have took forever. And there was no way they would have been able to do that in-house. But they were canceled, and we never heard of them ever again. But the dream of remaking all the PS1 era Final Fantasies has basically existed from the moment that stronger hardware became real, right? Like literally. Even the developers, you know, yeah, the FF8 dance demo, right? Like even the developers were kind of like, dang, FF789 would be so fucking cool in these graphics. Like, so it's not just the fans, even the creators also thought like, fuck, that'd be so cool to have those games in these graphics. Everyone kind of intuitively thinks that, you know, because those worlds were so cool looking. They were so ambitious and like so. I don't know, man. Like that's one thing for like FF17. I know that like if you look at it on paper, FF7 through 10, that's like literally like 4 years, 1997 to 2001. Like it's not like a really long period of time. If you extend that out to FF6, which you should because FF6 is based 1994 to 2001. So that's like a 7-year streak, which is also insane and very lucky. But yeah, if you look at that streak of games, we're still trying to recapture it. Like we're still trying to like we're still trying to like go back and be like, oh, it was so magical that one, 7-year streak of like, Square Enix constantly releasing, some of the best video games of all time. And like the best Final Fantasy games in the series, and like how do we get back to that? How do we achieve that again? And like what do they do? And it's a very difficult conversation to have, especially when you look at it from the perspective of it being that small window, because they were genuinely creating the most fascinating, interesting worlds that video games still in a lot of ways have ever seen, and they were doing it back to back to back. And part of the reason why I am a big fan of them standardizing some of FF's conventions, not to the point of where every FF game is a copy and paste of the last, but just to the point where they're focusing on innovating on the stuff that actually matters, is so they can do exactly that, innovate on the stuff that actually matters, right? FF7 didn't have wildly different combat from FF6 or 8. And honestly, they weren't really wildly different games either in terms of the general mechanics of them, right? But what they did is that they played with growth systems. So how you would actually ascend the power fantasy was different from the last game, right? You'd have materia in this game, and then you'd have junctioning in the next game. And it changed how you play. It changed the meta of the games, but the actual combat itself was pretty similar, and so was the format of the game. The world map, getting the airship eventually. But I think the actual fun thing is that they would approach all those things like really different, right? Like, here's how the world map is going to look and be laid out in this one. It's going to be fun to explore. And then you'll get the airship at this point in the game. And the way the characters evolve and the way the characters interact with the world is going to be different. And so they would change up the meta of all those things, and they would create what would feel like a unique world every time that was very independent and different from the other one, but also had this overlap, right? Also had this thing that was Final Fantasy, right? And I've discussed this with some people. I know we talked about this a lot, and I talked about earlier too that that Max was talking about it on his stream too, and he's really come to basically the same conclusion as me, where he's saying that they need to they need to do the thing again that allowed them to make the Golden Age Final Fantasy games, which was a consistent base that they would take in wildly different directions. And the consistent base was the thing that was identifiably Final Fantasy, but they would put like brand new twists on it that made it completely crazy, and then still somehow the thing that was identifiably FF from like a gameplay and progression standpoint, right? So they do need that thing again. Some people will then say though that like you do have to like come up with a brand new thing all the time, otherwise you're being stale, you're being stagnant, whatever. And you might point to something like Resident Evil 4 or like the new God of Wars and how those games got boosted by it, right? But here's the thing. Whenever they reinvented, say like with Resident Evil, right? Or with God of War, or with Zelda, they did not throw that shit out the very next game. They did not throw that shit out the very next game, right? And even the modern Resident Evil games are still pretty influenced by RE4, right? Like they still carry a lot of what RE4 did into the newer games. God of War 2018 set the foundation. God of War Ragnarok continues it. With Zelda, with Breath of the Wild, right? Or even you can go back to Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time reinvented Zelda into 3D, and then all the way through Skyward Sword, they carried the 3D Zelda conventions from Ocarina of Time over into all those titles. Then, when it was time, when the formula was growing stale, they said, okay, we're going to reinvent with Breath of the Wild, and we're going to come up with this new style of gameplay called open air, right? And guess what? Tears of the Kingdom is open air, and they've already confirmed, hey, the next style of Zelda is going to be like this, and this is going to be the style of Zelda that we use for the foreseeable future. Now, eventually, Zelda is going to get to the point where they say, we need to reinvent Zelda again. Hold on, there's the blow dryer. Let me turn my noise suppression on. There is going to be a point where they say, okay, we need to reinvent Zelda again. But for now, we're going to keep using and building on our new systems. So yes, you can and should reinvent every so often. But the problem with Final Fantasy is that they only reinvent when things get stale. Right. Here's the problem, is that nobody was tired of the older systems. They just threw them out because they thought they could sell more, I guess. Or not even, I guess. That's like literally what we know. They thought they could sell more if they reinvented them, right? So they weren't even getting stale. And people still pine for those systems. So it's kind of just like, they're throwing out food that's still edible. I was literally going to eat that. Why are you throwing it out? Is kind of the way they've approached these things. And if you guys saw the talk that I had on Resonant Arcs podcast, essentially, the problem is not even necessarily that the new styles may be polarizing or whatever, right? But let's suppose you're a new guy to Final Fantasy, right? Like you're a new guy and you play Final Fantasy 16. Suppose that FF16 is the greatest video game you've ever played, ever. It's the best FF. I mean, it's the only FF you've played, so of course it's the best one. But it like blows your mind. You think it is the greatest game of all time. You are like, holy crap. Where can I play more of this? Guess what? You can't. You literally, physically can't. There is no more of this. There is literally just Final Fantasy 16, and that's the only one like that. And guess what? Final Fantasy 17 is probably going to be a completely ass different game. It's probably going to play absolutely nothing like Final Fantasy 16. It'll probably not play anything like Rebirth either, unfortunately. It'll probably just be some random ass new thing. that like, but you see my point here, right? Is that like, you can't even be like, oh, that there are other games like similar to this. It's like, nope. They're completely, they're not even close to doing that. So if you are a new person and you do think, okay, Final Fantasy 16 is going to be like a whole ass different, Final Fantasy 16 is like this, and all the other Final Fantasy games aren't like that. But I thought FF16 was the best game of all time. What do I do after playing FF16? Do I go play turn-based hybrid Final Fantasy VII Remake? Do I go play the older Final Fantasy games that are turn-based and play absolutely nothing like FF16 greatest game of all time? No, dude, what do I play? I go play Devil May Cry 5 and Bayonetta. I go play Metal Gear Rising. Um, and not because like again, it that's in like a void of like necessarily like saying whether the games are good or bad because you can say FF16 greatest game of all time. FF7 Retrilogy also greatest games of all time. But suppose that I'm specifically looking for the type of gameplay and the type of game that say 16 was, right? And then I'm not going to get it from the previous 15 games. And then they're probably going to do something else, random ass different thing with 15 games. And I'm using 16 as an example, but this might also be true with like Retrilogy or any other FF game. I mean, you could have gotten in at like 15 even, right? And you could be like 15, greatest game of all time. Love the bro road trip. Love the open world. Love the car. What's the next game going to be? Oh, it doesn't play anything like, right? But here's the thing though, right? Um, if you liked FF6, there is a very strong chance you'll like FF7, right? Now, of course, one story may resonate with you more, one world may resonate with you more. You might like one soundtrack more. You might like the materia system more than junctioning. But the chances are, if you like that style of game, you like the next style of game. And you like the next style of game. And you like the next game and the next game, right? Not style. You get what I'm saying here, right? So, do you see how having that consistency and at the very least the type of game that they're making allows you as a new fan to jump in and continue to want to play them? An example that I always use, because it's a very personal example for me, is the Soulsborne games, right? The Soulsborne games actually are quite different. I would not agree that the FromSoft games, Souls games, are like the same game each time. They're actually all pretty unique in my opinion. At the same time, there's this underlying common DNA to all of them, common conventions, common mechanics, and etc. To the point of where wherever you start on your Souls journey, whether it's with Demon Souls or you played the latest Souls game like Elden Ring, you will go either forward or backward in the pipeline and be like, okay, chances are if you like that, if you like Demon Souls or Dark Souls, then you'll probably like, Dark Souls 3. You'll probably like Bloodborne. You'll probably like Sekiro. You'll probably like Elden Ring, right? Because there's a consistency in the design philosophy. Um, and even though those games are quite different from each other, Sekiro being quite a bit different, there is yeah, this is best put. Yeah, even if their combat formula has been kind of an iteration, every one of them have different structure or unique things to them. Right, exactly. And that's what Final Fantasy used to be. That's exactly what it used to be. That's exactly what it used to be. Like the style of game was kind of iterative on the last thing that they did, but they all had um their own world, their own characters, their own settings, and their own ways of doing progression systems and etc. that would uniquely resonate with each person, such that if you liked a Final Fantasy, the chances of you liking the next Final Fantasy, at least a little bit, it may not be your favorite, but enjoying it well enough to play through it was a pretty high chance. But we don't have that anymore, right? And that's just from the fan perspective, the brand and the perspective of the consumer. But like, if you get into the developer aspect of it too, reinventing all these combat systems, having to hire people each time because they don't have the experience to create the type of combat system that they're looking for, and then um, scrapping that each time and basically making a new IP each time. Very time consuming. And I'm not very sure what the benefit is. Now, if you don't like the recent FF, the next one is 5 years away. That's another thing too. There was a strong sense of frequency and enough familiarity, right? Because I don't even think that like what's being said here is that controversial that like the games should somewhat resemble each other, but even then I'm also saying not really. And not in a way that they haven't done before, especially in a way that they did before when they were at their most popular, right? So I'm not even saying that like um it shouldn't do this thing. It should do this thing that basically nerfs it from, what the highest potential of FF is, which I don't agree with, but and also too, I think the thing that Final Fantasy has done best is getting worse. I wanted to make an essay on this in particular, but I feel like there's too much negative discourse right now. So I feel like I can't drop another negative discourse video. But um the one thing that I like really wanted to like talk about in particular was that progression systems keep getting worse and like keep getting like less ambitious. And I don't understand why that's the case. That like because most games nowadays are trying to get more ambitious and more interesting with progression systems, and like I feel like progression systems are like not getting cool anymore. I guess like to give you an example of what I mean is that like FF had like really cool progression systems like materia and junction, and like FF9's like equipment system and 10 sphere grid and like that type of stuff. I'm not including the 7 remake games in this discussion, by the way, because 7R is like literally just um well, I mean, like, you can because there are some interesting progression systems in there. Um you know what I'm saying though. Basically it is Final Fantasy VII's materia system again, and it has some other stuff like laid on top of it. But like uh essentially what I'm bitching about is that they really haven't got like a system like any other new systems that are like cool progression systems. Like there's no like sphere grid anymore, you know? There's no junctioning. There's no item abilities. Yeah, none of that stuff happens anymore. No job system. Job system was also like really cool too. I think like the last FF that like really tried to have like an interesting growth system outside of the 7 remake games was FF12 with the license board and the Zodiac job system, especially in the remastered the Zodiac Age. That was really cool, but like like outside of that, we 12 was pretty much when like cool FF progression systems like stopped being a thing. Like the 13 Crystarium system, like man, that was not the sphere grid. Let's just say that was not the sphere grid. 15 had like these like little skill trees, and then that was it. uh 16, I'm sorry, y'all. 16 was probably like where we hit like rock bottom in terms of progression systems. um I was gonna say, like, I'm sure someone will argue with me on that, but I'm like, how can anyone actually argue with that? Because I feel like that's like objectively, not objectively, but like kind of just hard to refute because 16 like skill tree was like probably like one of the worst I've ever seen in any RPG, if I'm like just being like completely honest, because there was just, I mean, there wasn't even skills really. There was like a couple of things on like the Phoenix or the Ifrit, whatever the center one was, I forget. And then that was it. And then you had a couple of other skills you could learn. And then there was no like other like skills that you could actually like learn there, or like there was no like new abilities or anything you can add to your base kit. There was no like HP up or anything like that. Um yeah, the progression in gear was like it was so shallow. There was like nothing there. And you could just respec at any time. So like your choices had no consequence there. Mock the Moogle, hello. Yeah, even non RPG character action games have more engaging progression than 16. Yeah. Yeah, I was so baffled by how the progression systems were so like not even attempted in that game. Like they're not even weren't even going to be like, oh yeah, you can do this, and then Clive gets like more HP, or like he can get like more attack if you do this. It was basically just you level up and then you get the AP, and then you just put it into the you just put the points into the abilities, and there was no. To think the director of 16's Combat was the guy who did Dragon's Dogma and DMC, you can barely tell. Um, so I thought it was going to be closer to Dragon's Dogma before it came out. I did, because I thought that would have actually made more sense for FF than DMC, especially with like the pawn system, right? Because I guess my impression before the game came out was that Clive would be kind of like recruiting these bearers and recruiting kind of an army to fight. And so I was like, oh, a pawn system, using the pawn system from Dragon's Dogma would actually make a crap ton of sense, because you wouldn't have like personal allies or anything like that, but you'd have like these people that are fighting alongside you, and you know what I'm saying? So you'd be able to like have these NPCs and stuff. And yeah, I thought it was going in that direction, right? And you'd be able to configure that party any way you wanted to. Um, yeah, I thought that they were going in that direction. So I was like, oh, it's gonna have DMC flashiness. Yeah, exactly, Icefire. I was expecting that too. Dragon's Dogma would be 80% and the 20% DMC flashiness. 16 only has like 10% of either. Yeah, yeah. I thought it was gonna be like a very accessible Dragon's Dogma, right? Because Dragon's Dogma is kind of hardcore. So I thought it'd be like, and I don't say this like bad, but like a slightly watered down Dragon's Dogma, so that's a little bit more palatable for um, like the mainstream audience. But that's not what they did. I wish they did do that though, because that would have been a really cool idea for a game. I was surprised by how it had nothing about it really like Dragon's Dogma, since they could work with an RPG more, but since they turned it into a full on action. Well, I mean, here's the thing: they did turn it into a full on action game, but I think that the core issue, and I think that this isn't like a Yoshi P thing or a CPU3 thing, but I think it's been like a thing that's been happening in Square Enix for a long time outside of Re-Trilogy, because I think that's the first time that they've actually turned this around. But I think that they have actually been streamlining the RPG elements too much. I don't know if they feel like they're afraid that people won't enjoy hardcore role-playing game elements, and so they try to make them more streamlined. But I think for me it goes back to like maybe the reception of Final Fantasy 12 and how they shifted out of that with Final Fantasy 13, because 12 maybe had like this appearance of being a lot slower and being a lot more heavy on like RPG mechanics. So for example, you had gambits, and the license board and, you know, programming those gambits and figuring stuff out. And so 12 was super RPG heavy, right? And some of the way those mechanics were implemented kind of resulted in, I don't want to say backlash, because I still think that 12 overall was a well-received game, but it was divisive among the fans, right? So then Final Fantasy 13 comes out, and then you only have like 3 stats: HP, magic attack, and then physical attack. And then all the other, anything else is like hidden from you. And basically boils down to the paradigm system. So you only have 3 stats in like the whole game. And then that's it. And then everything on the Crystarium is just boosting those 3 stats or unlocking new abilities, and then that's it. And so that's when they streamlined the RPG-ness down. Yeah, and then Final Fantasy 15 came along, and then it took it a step further, where they basically removed magic, and they basically made magic into grenades, and then party members are AI controlled, and then all these other stuff. And so the game continued to kind of become less hardcore on the actual role-playing, gear-based, stat-based elements, and became a lot more focused on, I want to say action gameplay, but I guess non-role-playing specific gameplay would actually might be a better way to describe it, I guess. Because overall, you know, even though 13 is not action, it's definitely like where it started. And it was basically a gear shift away from like Final Fantasy 12, where they thought that they had went too hardcore with a lot of the role-playing elements. And they thought, at least, again, I don't necessarily know this for a fact, but it really appeared to me, judging from this sort of reception that something like 12 got, and then how they gear shifted after that into being less hardcore of an RPG, trying to be more accessible. Now, don't get me wrong, Final Fantasy games have always been fairly accessible RPGs, but that's also why I don't understand why it had to be streamlined to the point of where RPG elements are barely even present, right? And I think when you look at other games across the landscape, RPG elements are becoming more pronounced and not less, right? Like every game has RPG elements. There's fucking builds in God of War now. God of War is like a super build heavy RPG now. Zelda has like a fuck ton of RPG elements now. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, when people say, oh, they're not RPGs, they kind of are. Like, I would definitely consider all previous Zelda games action adventure, but I don't know if I would consider Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild like action adventure games anymore. They definitely are, but I think that they're also RPGs at this point because they even have like a leveling system, even though it's hidden from you and you can't see it. But so yeah. You're making me think FF7R with an all-new system around it, unlike Materia, and such, would make it fresh as hell again on its own? Brother, what if I told you? What if I told you, and I know you agree, but what if I told you that's exactly what they did during Final Fantasy's most highly acclaimed era in its entire history? They realized that the combat itself, once you had like, you know, a fun basic mechanic, what actually made the RPG combat fun, what actually made the games interesting was the progression systems. So once you had a good system that allowed you to express those choices and how meaningful and impactful they were, all you needed was to swap out with a new progression system to fundamentally change the game and how fun it was. God of War is totally an action RPG now. It is. Imagine 17 with Re-Trilogy's combat, but replacing material with a job system. That's one thing SE should consider. No, exactly. Or like, if not even like a job system, like some other type of like system that we've had before, like a sphere grid, or like, I mean, not reusing them, but like, I mean, like a completely different growth system that we've never seen before, right? Whether it's like the job system or something else. Like imagine like, oh, there's like a brand new growth system that we're doing and that's going to impact it. So you can't just equip like synergy to all the characters and break things, or you can't just equip elemental and stuff like that. I don't know. Things like that. So that would make the combat feel entirely different, and it would impact the boss design. It would impact all sorts of other things. So that's a good point. The combat of FF4 to 9 is the exact same, but the progression is completely different, gives them all a unique flavor. Yes. 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 And that is considered the greatest era of the entire series. And even when they reinvent it with 10, by the way, when they reinvent it with 10, it still didn't feel like it was that far off from the ATB games, because 10 at the end of the day still had what most FF fans were looking for in a Final Fantasy. It used conditional turn-based, but arguably that was better in most ways than active time battles. And so it's not like 10 necessarily removed those things other than the world map. But also, too, 10's removal of the world map is like different, I feel, than say 13's removal of the world map or other subsequent FF games removal of their world maps. And the reason I say that is, one, 10 actually legitimately had a good narrative like reason to remove the world map. The pilgrimage of Final Fantasy X would actually have been worse with the world map. So it's probably the only game in the series that I would say, like, objectively, I don't like to use that word. Let me come up with a different word. It's the only game that I cannot find a good, reasonable use for a world map in its design. It would actually make things bad for Final Fantasy X if it had a world map, because the design of the game would actually be worse and the impact of the narrative would actually be worse if FF10 had a world map. So not having a world map in 10 was actually not a bad choice. It would made the game better by actually having it be a pilgrimage with a more realistic world scale. That's why with 10 removing the world map, it wasn't that big of a deal. And that's why most people weren't as fazed by it. Not for the end game, yeah, but it would have been expensive to like put that in at the end of the game only. It would have been super expensive, and that's the only reason why it didn't happen. I mean, 13 didn't necessarily need a world map, but the problem with 13 wasn't the lack of a world map. It was the actual just like it was the level design, like, point blank. I think I would actually agree with you, but yeah, I just think that like the just the problem is that the actual like level design itself and the itemization, which meant that you really couldn't find anything worthwhile. Please make a video distinguishing progression systems from combat. I know you talked about that before, but that is clear terminology to drive home. Yeah, I know. Because I had said earlier too that I wanted to make a video on progression systems, but I feel like I need to like wait because there's too much, you know. Whenever fandoms don't have news, they become kind of negative and everything. So I don't want to just bombard videos with like me as like an FF PhD. This is like what you need to do to make the game good. So maybe I'll do it later, but I do think you're right. Like there is a need for a video from me where I explain these progression systems and why they were so good, and like why we need good progression systems again. I agree, especially narratively with how you go to each location, the tragic things that would happen, but you have to move forward with the pilgrimage, right? But and that's the thing is that I do think that most people forgave 10 for not having a world map because of what 10 accomplished ultimately. Also, too, I don't necessarily even think that a world map is I don't think a world map is necessary. Exactly. Right? Because I actually think that 10's world accomplishes what a world map does without even needing one. And that is a sense of exploration and a sense of progression and a sense of secrets that can be found. And I think that 10's level design and world structure actually provides all of those things, albeit not quite in the same format that a world map does. Right? So I do think that ultimately with 10 um you still get that sensation. True, because 10 was revolutionary and impressive in so many other ways at the time. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it did some other things too that just games weren't doing at the time. And so 10 was an example of like a very solid reinvention, right? 10 just had so many things going on that no other game or anything else was doing at the time, just purely because of like how advanced Square Enix was in terms of tech and like what they could make compared to everyone else in the industry back then. So it was allowed to do a lot of those things. And also like let's just be blunt. The reason 10 was able to get away with all that stuff is because it was so fucking good of a game that it was allowed to do things unorthodox. But because it was so fucking good, people forgave it. I mean, and that's just really like what it comes down to, right? Is that in a series, you can always do something, you can always break convention. But the thing is that when you break convention, you better do something very fucking good to supplement for that, right? RE4 remake or RE4 original, sorry. RE4 original is kind of an example of that. Game kind of violated everything that came from RE1 through 3 before it. But guess what? RE4 was so fucking good, no one cares. It's just good. It's so fucking good it can do that, right? So you can kind of take that leap. You can kind of take that chance and make the new thing. Um and as long as it's so good that people really can't complain, and if they do, they're the vast minority, then yeah, then no one can say anything. And that's what happened with Final Fantasy X. So 10 was able to do that because it was just damn good. RE4 is able to do that because it's just that damn good. Breath of the Wild can do that because it's just that damn good. So, um, you know, that's always the thing. But the problem also is too is that FF would probably be able to do that too, but I mean recent FF games I should say would be able to do that too. But the consensus hasn't been in the mainline numbered series that they've done that thing that was so overwhelmingly good that everyone was like, oh, this is the new identity of the series, right? Except I do think that they have done that. And I think that's Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy's Combat. I think that has been so damn good that people say, okay, this style of combat is the brand new identity of the series, right? Like that's the large consensus. I haven't, and honestly, you know, so much of the FF stuff is like so contentious, but this is one of those things where I really haven't found too much contention on. I thought that this was going to be one of those things where I got a lot of support on it first, and people were like, yeah. And then as like time went on for like a few months, everyone would be like, nah, that's stupid. Fuck you, NSP. Like, actually, it should be like a brand new thing again because that's what FF does or whatever the fuck people say. Um, but actually, what I found is more and more people agreeing and more people coming around to what I've been saying here. And now Max has also reiterated that too on like one of his recent streams where he's like, yo, he's like, this combat is kind of the new identity of the series for me, like in terms of gameplay. And yeah. So again, I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been like tremendous pushback from that idea, but the fact that there hasn't been tremendous pushback from that idea also shows me, tells me that most people agree that there needs to be some type of foundation going forward, and not just them doing a different ass fucking thing, and not just like, yeah, we're just gonna like try something, you know, completely different, and see how people like it, and see if we get any new fans, and then people just end up like not giving a fuck. The funny thing is, SES found that new thing that is so damn good in the Re-Trilogy, but I don't think they see it. They will scrap it for something else in 17. Re-Trilogy's combat is the closest thing I've seen from multiple sides of the fandom coming to an agreement to. Like, no matter if it's medieval, mystic story, or sci-fi epic, Re-Trilogy's combat would actually fit as easily as classic ATB would. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's like, I think if 16 had like if 16 had the ATB system of Re-Trilogy, I think that game would have had almost no controversy. And not only do I think it would have had like almost no controversy, I think it unironically would have been tremendously more successful too, even from like, because I think a lot of the veteran fans that like kind of defected from it would have been like more into it. And I think people would have really enjoyed controlling Jill and Joshua and Torgal. I think people like would have really connected with that. I disagree because the main issue wasn't the combat system of 16, it was the enemy design. I mean, I'm implying that like they would have the type of enemy design that Re-Trilogy would have. But like, I do actually agree that the problem with that game's combat wasn't the combat itself, it was the enemy designs. I actually do agree with that. Like, I think that you would have to like, to really fix that game for me, you'd probably have to change the design of the enemies. Because what Clive can do is cool, right? Like you see like really cool combo videos and stuff like that. I don't think that there's anyone who would sit here and say that like Clive can't do cool things. Clive can do very cool things, but like if I was to look at that game's combat and then draw like out my issues with it, I don't think my issues with it are ever like the problem is Clive can't do this. And most of my problems with it is that the enemies don't do anything enough. Only certain enemies can keep up with Clive. Right. So I think like when you're fighting Ultima or you're fighting Odin or you're fighting whatever, what's that guy's name? Like Timekeeper from the DLC. So when you're fighting like some of those fights, that's when you actually see like what the potential of the battle system is. From the perspective of like, what if enemies were made to be more aggressive, more engaging, and have really interesting attack patterns and mechanics that you had to perform. And then it's sort of like, oh, okay, actually this is really fun, this is really interesting. And then you fight like most of the enemies in the world map. And um, here's the thing: if you're really into style and expression, and that becomes the primary thing that you look for in a game, then you'll probably not really care that those enemies are not doing that. However, I think that there is a large portion of people that typically look for more than just styling on the enemies, and they want to be able to. I guess the difference here is intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is I want to do cool combos just because cool combos are fun, right? So people who just want to do them because they think that they're fun to do are going to do them, right? Extrinsic motivation is I will do cool combos if you give me a cool item, or if it does more damage, or if or if something in the game happens as a result of me doing that, right? Now, the thing is that the best video games do both. They give you the internal motivation. I want to do the thing because it's cool and it feels good. And if you do the thing, you do get a rare item or you do more damage, etc. So, a really good game loop is going to include both of those things. And the thing with 16 and whether its combat is going to click with you or not, basically is rooted in if you can be purely intrinsic about the pleasure that you derive from playing the game. Purely, I enjoy this because I just enjoy making combos and doing combos. Then you will have a really, really good time with that game, more than likely. It will really click with you from that perspective. However, if you're the type of person that wants a combination or both, or you need some type of extrinsic motivation to get you to participate in a mechanic, otherwise that mechanic is just there for you, then it's going to probably be like a super bad experience and you're not really going to click with it too well, right? And that's what it comes down to. This is why I think FF16 combat is not that far from fitting in a good FF game. You just need different enemy design in other systems, like what if they mixed 7R and 16. Um, it's difficult because it's hard to mix 7R and 16 because their battle systems are fundamentally telling you to do different things. So a lot of 16's combat is way more based on style, where 7R's is not based on style really at all. 7R's is basically telling you that you should, whatever means that you can do to melt the enemy as fast as possible in the way that you find most strategic is what you should do. But 16 is telling you that you should style on the enemy and make the most fun use, creative use of your entire kit, do juggles and all this other stuff. And enemies' health is kind of inflated in order to allow you to do more stuff and to do more combos. So there's not really a way that you can blends the two combat systems together as far as I can personally see, purely because they tell you to do fundamentally opposite things. Monster Hunter is a good example of the combat loop being fun to do because the monsters are fun to fight and executing the combos on them is satisfying. Vanita Sentiment 13, thank you so much for another super chat. I appreciate you. I agree. Yeah, and you learn to take on that monster better and better each time you go and fight them. It's a very good gameplay loop. Well, okay, so I know some people saying like, well, if 16 had like elemental status damage, it'd be better. But actually, I think if you talk to the people that are like really into that game's combat system, they would probably like disagree. And I'm also inclined to disagree that you could just like add elemental into 16 and then it feel more like, you know, being strategic, because the problem is with that system is that it's about expression, right? So the reason that elements aren't even a thing to begin with is because you can't combo if the enemies are made to be weak to certain elements, right? So all of a sudden, then you can't do the same stuff. You can't play the game as a combo character action game like you could currently. I feel like elemental weakness in 16 could have been a fairly easy toggle on, toggle off. No. It was very much a very. It wasn't something that they didn't think about. I can tell you that like very strongly with a very strong degree of confidence. They thought about it. They considered it, but they realized that it was fundamentally wrong for their game design. And they were right. It is fundamentally wrong for their game design. I get what people are saying. What I think people mean by it is that elemental weaknesses should have been factored into the game design from the start, such that we didn't have a game design that didn't eliminate the need for elemental weaknesses, or didn't have like a way to fit elemental weaknesses into its design, if that makes sense. You would need an icon select wheel and be able to change elements on the fly to have access to all of them at once, right? Yeah, so you'd have to make a pretty big difference to how icon equipment worked. And then also, too, you wouldn't have access to most of the elements throughout most of the game, right? So then that also creates a bit of a problem. Kingdom Hearts 3 has elemental weaknesses. It's fine. Yeah, but that's because Kingdom Hearts has elemental weaknesses baked into its design principles, right? Because Kingdom Hearts 3 isn't a character action game. So it doesn't have to have, I mean, it's an action game, yes, but it's not like a character action game like a Bayonetta. Whereas 16 is more closely aligned with that, and those elemental weaknesses in those type of games don't really work well. Could have been party based, where each character has access to 3 icons, then Clive having access to all of them. Right, but then you have to rewrite the lore about Muthos, right? Because then Clive couldn't have been as special as he currently is. So you would have to like rewrite basically the story around that. That's why I say it's not like something that you can. It's not like something that you can basically like add in at like a later point in development or patch in, or like, oh, if you can just change it, like take the same system and change it. Because if you actually add in elemental weaknesses, it would fundamentally become a different battle system altogether. Once you start factoring in other stuff, it would basically change into another battle system. Like even if you added, what do you think about status effects like poison? Yeah, that would also change the battle system quite a lot too, because if you had status effects like poison, then you have to think about the mechanic around what do you do to get to mitigate or get rid of status effects like poison, right? So then you either have to have magic that gets rid of it, like an Asuna, or you have to have antidotes and stuff like that, which means more items, right? But then you have items mapped to the D-pad. You have, there's only like 6 items in the whole game. But then You know, you have the items mapped to the D-pad, and then yeah, and then how are you going to use those abilities, right? To use Asuna. But then if you did use Asuna, right? If you did have Asuna as in a cooldown ability, then what happens is you would have to unequip your attack commands and put Asuna into one of them. Okay? So if I have to take off one of my abilities and put Asuna on it, that greatly affects my ability to DPS, right? Because one of my cooldowns is gone. Okay? So now that one of my cooldowns is gone, my combo potential has gone down. And remember, I can only equip, like, what is it, 6 icon abilities, and then the 3 abilities that the icon basically fixed has that you can only use, like Garuda's like claw and stuff like that. The grapple. I mean, so do you see how just adding poison creates a chain reaction of like things you have to change in the battle system that fundamentally end up altering the way the whole system works? I mean, that's how game design tends to be in general, but like uh but yeah, just adding that one thing in basically changes fundamentally the whole game. So, and having elemental weaknesses, for example, right? Well, basically, like Ultimaniac and like the way like the scoring system works and the way all that other system works, that has to be like thrown out. That no longer works, right? And then the meta of your build also changes. But then also on top of that, you know, all of your actions are elemental, right? So Garuda is always going to be wind. Uh, Phoenix is always going to be fire, but you can only equip, you know, so many of those abilities. So, Gotch, thank you for the tier 1. My boy, I can't believe it's been over 5 years. I hope you have been doing great. Jesus Christ, it has been 62 months. Jesus Christ, Gotch, thank you so so fucking much. I appreciate that, dude. Holy crap. Basically, since I started streaming on Twitch, that is crazy. Thank you 1,000. So yeah, you can't just change like one of those things and then it'd be like um and then it'd be the same battle system. Even throwing in like one of those things would actually do deep changes. So that's why I say, I promise you guys, they did consider it. But they just didn't find that it fit with the battle system that they were trying to go for, which was more like a character action Bayonetta DMC than the type of like RPG action hybrid system that you guys are trying to make it into be. What I think you guys are describing what you want though is an action RPG that does factor in those things, but feels flashy in the way that Clive's current movesets are, right? And I think that's also valuable. I think what it tells me is that can you make a Final Fantasy 17 that at its core plays like a tactical hybrid turn-based action game like Final Fantasy 7 Re-Trilogy, but have the flashiness and the responsiveness of the way that Clive controls in 16. I think that's what people are actually like really ultimately trying to describe with you know, the idea of merging 16 and Rebirth together into one game. I think that's like the sensation that they're actually wanting. But actually like overlaying them on top of each other or trying to make, you know, 16 have party members, which is also another thing that like they really couldn't do without fundamentally changing how that game works. Yeah. It might sound flippant then to throw out, but if it prevents elements of FF that seem to want to then throw it the fuck out, this might be a tag callous, but the battle system they were trying to go for failed in what it was trying to do. I mean, yeah. I mean, well, I guess like it's hard to say because I mean there are people that really do love the system, right? Like I mean I go on Twitter and I see a lot of people, not an insignificant amount of people who like to them it's like the best battle system ever. So I don't know. Like for them and like it clicks pretty hard and they think it's goated and they're not wrong because that's how they feel and if they play it and that's the conclusion they walk away with, that's good. Art's subjective, and their opinion is as valid as the next person in terms of whether they liked it or not, whether they thought it was good or not. But um, you know, but I do think that if we are talking about the broader like what should Final Fantasy be, what is going to be a system that isn't divisive among potential new fans and old fans, and what system do we think has the most potential to grow the brand and to also do that while not really forsaking what it is that people liked about Final Fantasy leading up to this point, then I think Re-Trilogy's combat style is kind of the way to go. Like I think that that's the apex of FF combat. No, I don't think they should abandon 16's combat at all. In fact, I think what the smart thing to do is that they should do the same thing that FF2 did with Saga, or Saga did with FF2, and that is that you know there were people that really liked the way FF2's growth systems and stuff worked, and so they took that and they made its own series basically of that type of gameplay, right? So what I think that they should do is that they should take Final Fantasy 16's combat, which again does have a group of people that really loved it. To them, it's their favorite combat in the series, and they like really clicked with it, and that's the type of game that they want more of, and that's an audience. So I think the appropriate thing to do is to take Final Fantasy 16's battle system and create a new IP. And make a game series that can continue to satisfy the audience of gamers that really felt like 16's combat was great and really loved it. And I feel like it's probably too divisive for the main series, regardless of how I personally feel about it either way. But I think that it fits perfectly for a new series for CS3 to work on. And then also too, they wouldn't have to feel pressured by the confines of Final Fantasy, right? Like, yeah, new action game IP. They need new IP anyways. So being able to make it into its own new IP where it doesn't have to be judged by how good of a Final Fantasy it is, it can just be a new action game instead, right? I feel like if FF16 had more interesting gear choices and progression, I wouldn't have minded the repetitive battles nearly as much. I mean, 1000%. I couldn't agree more. Um, yeah, I think that RPG elements are just too essential, and I don't think that elemental weaknesses and stuff like that are just set, what is it called? Set dressing? Is that the expression or word? I think they're actually like really important. I think playing as different characters is also really important. And I don't think we can forsake those things as I think about it harder. I think those things are just too important. I think that you have to have those things. And hopefully we're going to continue to have those things going forward. They have the groundworks there too. They could do what Capcom did back with DMC, since that diverted from RE too much even more so that RE4, much like could be said with 16, even if I personally like it a bunch. Yeah. All right, I think that is where we're going to end this stream today, guys. We are going to be back on April 2nd. And I think you guys all know it's happening April 2nd. That is the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. We're going to be streaming it live here on YouTube and on Twitch. So I'm very, very, very hopeful that you will all come back so that I'm not lonely. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great time. I'm really excited for it. Hopefully, they'll have some good announcements. Maybe FF9 Remake will be there. I don't know. I'm not counting on it. I do think if it's going to be announced, Summer Games Fest is where it'll happen. But yeah, here's to hoping. All right, guys. I love you so much. And I'll see you all. What day is that? I'll see you all Wednesday on April 2nd. All right.